I woke up in a dark cave with 4 other farmers. A cruel man with a whip was forcing us forward. He was a lord, and we were just his expendable workers. He wanted us to go inside and bring out a treasure chest, and he didn't care if we died doing it. A system message played in my head, welcoming me to some kind of universal lord game. It talked about recruiting farmers, gathering resources, training soldiers, and expanding territory. There was a 7-day newbie protection period. But none of that mattered right then. I wasn't a lord. I was a farmer, a disposable pawn. We crept into the cave. Deep inside, we found a massive brown tiger with crimson eyes. It was wounded badly, blood pooling beneath it, guts dragging on the ground. We tried to sneak past it to reach the chest, but it lunged at us. I screamed at the others to fight. We killed it, but 4 of my fellow farmers died in the struggle. Only I walked out alive. I waved the lord over. He came running, thrilled that the monster was dead. He rushed past the bodies without a second glance and headed straight for the chest. When he saw it was already open, he hesitated, and that was his last mistake. I buried my stone axe into the back of his neck. He couldn't believe it. A farmer attacking a lord. My second swing took his head off. The system announced I'd killed a lord and gained 500 evil points. I took the lord's book from his belt, a leather-bound volume with golden patterns that worked like a tablet computer. But then came the bad news. Because of my evil points, I was automatically assigned to the dark faction, the undead. That meant I was now an enemy of everyone. I didn't regret it. Being a public enemy was still better than being someone's slave. I checked the Lord's book. My resources were at 0. I could craft rope, stone axes, and stone pickaxes. My only building option had changed from level 1 farmhouse to level 1 graveyard, a side effect of being undead. There was also a chat channel where other lords were panicking about giant snakes, wild boars, and hyenas outside their villages. Most of them were too scared to even step outside. I went back to the tiger's corpse and butchered it, gaining 600 units of meat, 45 hides, and 25 bones. Now that I had the Lord's book, I finally had a Lord's power. The real game was just beginning. The tiger's body dissolved in a flash of light. Meat, hide, and bones separated neatly on their own. The skeleton left behind crumbled to dust, revealing the items I'd hidden underneath: a level 1 warehouse blueprint and 5 ropes. The blueprint flew into my Lord's book automatically. I gathered the dead farmer's tools, tied up the meat and hides, and hurried toward my territory. I needed to get behind that newbie protection barrier fast. When I arrived, I found a shabby wooden cabin surrounded by a transparent shield. Nearby was a half-underground structure, a level 1 graveyard. While other lords had farmhouses to recruit farmers, my building only let me summon skeletons. My whole setup had gone from normal to undead. I recruited immediately. The system said I could recruit 5 skeletons, but then my 100 times amplification kicked in. 505 skeletons crawled out of the ground, bony hands first. They packed my territory so tight some were standing outside the shield. They were basic workers. No emotions, no morale, immune to poison and disease, but weak against light magic. Just bags of bones, really. But I was actually relieved. Skeletons don't need food. If I'd gotten 500 farmers instead, I'd never be able to feed them, and they'd rebel. Maybe chop my head off the same way I'd done to the last lord. I handed out the few tools I had and sent them to work. Then I checked the crafting page. Ropes cost 2 grass each. Axes and pickaxes cost 1 stone, 1 wood, and 1 rope each. Half an hour later, the first skeletons came back carrying wood and stone. I crafted 1 rope, and the amplification triggered again, giving me 101. Same thing happened with axes and pickaxes. Everything I made got multiplied by 100. I crafted 202 axes and 303 pickaxes, piling them into a small mountain beside my cabin. I called the skeletons back to grab tools and get back to work. Then I noticed about 28 tools were left over, meaning over 20 skeletons hadn't returned. Before I could worry too much, a group of them came marching back carrying a 1-horned goat they'd hunted. They were banged up, one missing an arm, another with broken ribs, but they just dumped the goat on the ground and turned to leave without a word. I had to shout at them to grab tools before heading out again. Meanwhile, in the chat channel, other lords were complaining that their farmers got tired quickly and needed constant rest. My skeletons had no stamina bar at all. They just worked non-stop, dropping off resources and going right back out. Perfect employees. I butchered the goat. 500 meat, 20 hides, 15 bones. Resources were piling up fast. My 500 skeletons worked non-stop, and resources piled up fast, so fast that the open ground in front of my cabin was buried under mountains of wood, stone, and grass. I needed storage badly. I opened the building menu. A level 1 warehouse cost 300 wood, 280 stone, 100 grass, and 50 ropes. I crafted 1 rope from grass, and the 100 times amplification kicked in again, 101 ropes, just like that. I built the warehouse, half expecting 100 of them to pop up, but thankfully only 1 appeared. The skeletons immediately started putting resources inside it instead of dumping them on the ground. With resources still flowing in, I upgraded my main building next. The cabin glowed and transformed into a bigger, sturdier level 2 Lord's cabin. Then a world announcement blasted across every Lord's ears 3 times. I was the first Lord in the entire world to upgrade my main building. The rewards were huge. Influence points across all factions, a passive skill called Bone Command that boosted my skeleton's speed and stats, a green tier crossbow blueprint, and a purple tier special building blueprint called Spring of Renewal. The crossbow needed iron and metal parts one didn't have yet. The spring needed all kinds of rare materials: hardwood, stone bricks, nature gems, forest traces, spring traces, magic essence. Way beyond what I could gather right now, but still exciting for the future. The chat channel exploded. Everyone was shocked and angry. They couldn't understand how anyone could gather enough resources so quickly when their farmers collected only 20 units of wood per hour. Some accused me of cheating. I closed the channel and ignored them. To push my advantage further, I upgraded my graveyard to level 2. The recruitment cap went from 5 to 10, but since I'd already used 5, I could recruit 5 more. I hit recruit. The amplification triggered again. Another 505 skeletons crawled out of the earth. I now had over 1,000 workers. I crafted another batch of axes and pickaxes and sent them all out. Before I could finish giving orders, a wolf howl cut through the air. A pack of about 10 prairie wolves had charged into my working skeletons, tearing them apart. A few skeletons fought back, but couldn't handle the wolves alone. I shouted for all nearby skeletons to attack. About 100 of them heard me, turned around, and rushed the wolves without hesitation. Skeletons feel no fear. When I give an order, they charge no matter what. More skeletons kept joining the fight. The wolves managed to kill quite a few of mine, but they were overwhelmed by sheer numbers. 6 wolves lay dead. The rest broke through and fled. I had the bodies brought inside and butchered them. 2,400 meat, 120 hides, 90 bones. But I wasn't happy. Those wolves were a threat. They disrupted my workers, destroyed some of my skeletons, and could come back anytime, or even attack me directly. The newbie protection shield was still up, so now was the best time to deal with them for good. I grabbed a weapon and shouted for everyone to follow. Over 900 skeletons formed up around me, and we marched in the direction the wolves had fled. We pushed through the forest and found the wolf pack, over 20 of them lounging on a grassy plain, with a dark cave behind them. Based on my earlier experience with the tiger cave, there was probably something stronger hiding inside. I tried to tell my skeletons to surround the wolves first, but they just stared at me blankly. So I gave up on tactics and told them to charge. Nearly 1,000 skeletons burst out of the bushes, and their sheer numbers naturally formed a half circle around the wolves. The pack didn't stand a chance. They were buried under a wave of bone and stone axes within seconds. All 20-something wolves hacked to pieces. Then a pair of eerie green eyes lit up inside the cave. A massive wolf king stepped out and let loose a thundering howl. But the moment it saw the ocean of skeletons waiting outside, the howl died in its throat. My skeletons poured into the cave, and minutes later they walked back out carrying the wolf king's body and a wooden treasure chest, which they dropped at my feet without ceremony. Inside the chest were 2 blueprints, a level 1 barracks and a basic wooden shield. Both flew into my lord's book. I was thrilled. A barracks meant I could finally recruit real soldiers. We hauled everything back to the territory. I butchered the wolves. 24 regular ones gave me 9,600 meat, 480 hides, and 360 bones. The Wolf King added another 800 meat, 50 hides, and 40 bones. My meat supply was getting absurd. I couldn't possibly eat all of it myself. I built the barracks right away. For my undead faction, it was called the Bone Burial Ground. Recruiting one skeleton soldier cost 300 bones. Good thing I just collected plenty from the wolves. I recruited one, the amplification triggered, and out came 101 skeleton soldiers. They were slightly bigger than the worker skeletons, wore tattered cloth scraps on their upper bodies, and had combat skills including sword fighting, shield use, and a shield bash that could stun enemies. Not amazing, but a real step up from bare-handed laborers. I crafted wooden shields. One became 101 thanks to the amplification, and armed every soldier with a shield and a stone axe. I ordered them to patrol around the territory and protect the workers from beast attacks. By then it was getting dark. My stomach reminded me I was still human. I lit a fire inside my cabin, chopped some meat into chunks, skewered them on sticks, and roasted them over the flames. While waiting for dinner, I opened the chat channel. People were desperate. Some were starving, begging for food. Others couldn't leave their villages because of monsters outside. Someone offered 5 million yuan to go back to the real world. Another claimed to be a film school beauty, begging to be fed. That gave me an idea. I had way too much meat. It would rot before I could use it. So I figured out the trading system in my lord's book and posted an offer. 1,000 units of meat, priced at 50 wood, 40 stone, or 5 iron, or per unit. I also added that special items could be discussed privately for bonus food. The channel went crazy. People recognized my name from the world announcement. Some called me a genius, some called me a price gouger. One guy offered his gold tooth, another offered a gold chain. Everyone was arguing and joking, but the important thing was, I had something everyone needed, and they were going to pay whatever I asked. My 1,000 units of meat sold out in under 2 minutes. My private messages exploded, people begging, bargaining, one person even offering private photos for food. I ignored the freeloaders. The price I set wasn't unreasonable. Anyone could afford it if they did a little gathering. The problem was that almost nobody could safely leave their territory to hunt, so food was the scarcest resource around. Wood and stone could be collected slowly, but an empty stomach wouldn't wait. I put up another 500 units. Gone instantly. Between both sales, I earned 60,000 wood, nearly 12,000 stone, and 20 iron. The materials flooded my territory until only a narrow path remained for walking. Then I got an interesting private message. Someone wanted to trade a simple leather armor blueprint. White quality, basic stuff, but exactly what I needed right now. He explained he'd used all his resources upgrading buildings and now had nothing left to feed himself and his farmers. I could have lowballed him since he was desperate, but I offered 50 units of meat, which was generous. He accepted gratefully, and the blueprint was mine. I crafted the armor right away. One became 101 thanks to the amplification. I put one on myself and handed the rest to my skeleton soldiers. White bones wrapped in leather actually looked halfway decent. That night, I piled some grass inside my cabin as a bed and passed out. Woke up with a sore back. Sleeping on straw wasn't great for the body. The skeletons had worked through the entire night without stopping. I relit the campfire, roasted some meat for breakfast, and posted another 2,000 units for sale. People were practically camping out waiting for me. The meat vanished even faster than yesterday. My name was becoming well known. The guy with endless food while everyone else starved. With all the traded materials piling up, I got to work upgrading. I pushed my warehouse to level 2. It went from a grass shack to a proper wooden building that could store 30,000 units and keep food from spoiling. I wanted to go to level 3, but the system told me I needed a level 3 lord's cabin first. Just as I was about to upgrade my cabin, a private message came in from someone named Dong Jiayue. She had a special mineral to trade for meat. When she showed me what it was, my eyes lit up. Shadow stone, a rare or specifically needed for upgrading undead faction buildings. I'd been watching the chat channel for days hoping someone would sell this stuff, and here it was, delivered right to my doorstep. I played it cool when Dong Jiayue offered me the shadow stone. I told her it probably wasn't useful to me, hoping to hide how badly I actually needed it. She explained she'd found it inside an underground tomb near her territory. That was interesting. Apparently shadow stone came from places connected to death and burial. She was desperate for food, So I offered 30 units of meat per stone, which was fair. She agreed happily and promised to trade more if she found any. Deal done. With resources pouring in from both my skeletons and the meat trades, I upgraded my lord's cabin to level 3. It grew bigger, sturdier, more refined. No world announcement this time, though. That reward was only for being first. I checked my other buildings, but both the graveyard and the bone burial ground needed shadowstone to upgrade further, and I only had one. I did manage to push my warehouse to level 3, boosting storage to 50,000 units. Still not enough. Resources were piling up everywhere, overflowing onto every open patch of ground. After finishing the upgrades, I decided it was time to explore beyond my territory. Other lords were already mapping their surroundings, and I couldn't afford to fall behind. I tightened my leather armor, grabbed a stone axe, and called all my skeleton soldiers to follow me as guards. We headed past the cleared forest. My worker skeletons had stripped a huge area bare and reached a wide plain with a clear stream running through it. I carved its location onto a wooden board as a simple map. Then, following the stream upstream, I spotted something in the soft mud. Well, tracks. Someone, or something, was nearby. I followed the tracks with my soldiers and soon found the source. A group of about 20 dog-headed humanoids, short and hunched, with gray skin. They were pulling a flat cart loaded with bloody animal carcasses. The system identified them as kobold slingers, second-tier creatures armed with stone slings. They spotted us too. After a moment of shock, they started howling and whipping their slings at us. The stones hit hard. My frontline skeletons stumbled from the impacts. But with shields and leather armor absorbing most of the damage, nothing critical got through. I ordered the charge. Hundreds of skeleton soldiers rushed forward with shields raised. The kobolds were outnumbered 10 to 1. Once my skeletons got in close, the slingers could only flail around with tiny daggers. They didn't last long. Every last one was cut down. After the fight, I had the skeletons clean up the battlefield. That's when I noticed something interesting beside each kobold body. Strange white bones shaped like vertebrae. They were called writhing spines, described as a sacrificial item used for recruiting undead troops. Another way to build my army, and these kobolds had just handed it to me. Now I understood what the writhing spines were for. In the chat channel, people had mentioned that recruiting soldiers required special consumable items. For the human faction, it was something called soul crystals. For my undead faction, it was these writhing spines. The bones I'd been using from butchered animals were just a temporary substitute. One spine was worth 300 regular bones. The skeletons cleaned up the battlefield quickly. We got 21 iron daggers, 8 writhing spines, a flatbed cart, and some animal carcasses. Not every kobold body dropped a spine, though. Only about a third of them did. I pocketed an iron dagger for myself. It was just a white tier weapon, basically an iron blade jammed onto a wooden handle, but it hit harder than a stone axe in a fight. I swapped out weapons for 20 uninjured soldiers and pressed forward. I needed to find where those kobolds came from. Their trail wasn't hard to follow. Wool tracks in the dirt and a cleared path through the trees. At the far end, I found their camp, a walled settlement made of logs with watchtowers, kobolds streaming in and out, gathering resources just like any human village would. Except there was no protection shield, and some of their hunting parties were bringing back human bodies alongside animal ones. I counted roughly 500 to 600 kobolds inside. Besides the slingers, there were warriors with iron swords and brutes with iron axes. This camp was a serious threat sitting right on my doorstep, but attacking now would be reckless. I pulled my soldiers back quietly. We returned to the territory with the captured cart and animal carcasses. I butchered the 2 goats and the deer, 1,200 meat, 90 hides, 60 bones. Not bad, but the real prize was the intelligence about that kobold camp. I went straight to the barracks. With writhing spines, recruiting was far more efficient. I spent all 8 spines. The amplification triggered, and 808 new skeleton soldiers appeared. I crafted shields and axes for all of them, then split them into groups, some for hunting, some for hauling resources back to the warehouse. After giving orders, I sat down and sliced meat with my iron dagger, grilled it over the fire, and ate lunch. Thin slices cooked much better than the chunks I'd been hacking with a stone axe. Still no seasoning, though. While eating, I checked the chat channel. Things were getting worse for everyone else. Some lords reported undead creatures appearing near their territories. Others had farmers killed by unknown attackers. People were begging for weapons, soul crystals, and food. One guy named Rin Yongning offered to make someone CEO of his company if they could get him home. Nobody knew who he was. Then I saw it. Dozens of messages calling my name, begging me to sell food. Someone had apparently spread a rumor that I was dead. They were all waiting, resources saved up, ready to trade. I posted 2,000 units of meat. The channel went silent for 2 seconds, then erupted with cheers and praise. Food was still the hottest commodity in this world, and I was still the only one who could supply it in bulk. The 2,000 units of meat sold out in seconds. My territory was overflowing with traded resources. Dong Jieyue messaged me again. She'd found 2 more shadow stones. I bought them for 60 meat, same rate as before. We were both happy. She got food that could last days or be traded for other things, and I got the rare material I needed for my undead buildings. With 3 shadow stones total now, I finally had enough to upgrade my underground graveyard to level 3. The recruitment cap jumped from 10 to 20. I recruited 10 more skeletons. The amplification kicked in, and 1,010 new worker skeletons appeared. I crafted tools for all of them, then mass-produced leather armor and wooden shields, 3,030 armors, and 2,020 shields after amplification. My army now stood at roughly 2,000 worker skeletons and 900 skeleton soldiers. I equipped everyone with armor and shields. Only 20 soldiers had iron daggers. The rest carried stone axes. Not ideal, but the kobold camp had to be dealt with soon. I climbed onto a boulder and tried to give a rousing speech. Bones and dogs have been enemies since ancient times. Today we reclaim our undead dignity. Dead silence. 1,000 empty eye sockets stared back at me. Not a single reaction. I jumped down, muttering that these skeletons were going to give me depression. Other lords at least had farmers they could talk to. I'd been living with nothing but silent bones for 2 days and was already starting to lose it. I'd even caught myself saying, "We undead." We marched out, a massive column of skeletons surrounding me for protection. I led them along the route I'd mapped that morning. When we got close to the kobold camp, I had everyone crouch and move through the bushes to close the distance. We had no ranged weapons, so I wanted to shorten the charge as much as possible. We weren't exactly stealthy. Thousands of skeletons pushing through bushes made a lot of noise. A kobold woodcutter spotted the rustling and stared in our direction. No point hiding anymore. I gave the order to attack. The skeletons burst from the bushes and charged. The kobold camp blew a horn and slammed its gates shut, leaving their own people outside to die under my skeleton's axes. Up on the log walls, kobold slingers started launching stones. Against shields and armor, the damage was manageable, but any stone that hit an unprotected worker skeleton cracked or shattered bones outright. I cursed my lack of ranged troops, but numbers won out. My skeletons reached the walls and started climbing on top of each other, stacking their bodies like a living ladder to scale the 3-meter-high defenses. Watching it happen reminded me of that scene from World War Z, the zombies piling over the wall. Except this time, the zombies were on my side. The kobolds weren't strong. They'd always relied on numbers and simple tricks. Today they met something with even greater numbers. My skeletons stacked on top of each other to climb the walls while others hacked the gate down. Once the flood poured inside, it was close-quarters chaos. The kobolds had no coordination, each one just fighting whatever was nearest. They were swallowed up quickly. When the camp fell silent and the skeletons stood motionless awaiting orders, I walked in and told them to collect everything. I explored the largest building first, probably the chieftain's quarters. Inside was wild-styled furniture, a bearskin rug, wooden tables, and chairs. I ordered it all taken outside. My own territory had nothing but a grass pile for a bed, so I wasn't being picky. In the back room, I found a real bed with fur blankets, and in the corner, a black iron treasure chest. I almost punched the air. I finally had a bed. The chest gave me 3 blueprints, a marketplace building, a cart design, and an iron axe design, plus 20 war coins. Way better than the wooden chests I'd opened before. After ransacking the entire camp, I tallied everything up. Resources included 122 writhing spines, over 5,500 wood, 3,200 stone, 47 iron, 3,200 meat, and various hides and bones. For equipment, I grabbed 120 iron daggers, 72 single-edge swords, 45 battle axes, and 12 flatbed carts. Plus, all the furniture, the bed, the rug, a big iron cooking pot, tables, chairs. The raid cost me roughly a third of my forces. But that barely mattered. Worker skeletons were free to summon on cooldown, and with 122 writhing spines, I could recruit over 10,000 skeleton soldiers through my amplification whenever I wanted. Every way I looked at it, this was pure profit. Plundering really was the fastest way to grow. 12 carts weren't enough to haul everything, so I crafted one cart, and the amplification gave me 101. The skeletons loaded up all the loot and tied it down. Before leaving, I took one last look at the camp. It was a decent outpost, built-in storage, shelter, cleared land. I could station some worker skeletons here later as a secondary resource-gathering base. We blocked the gate and headed home along the main road since the carts couldn't fit through the forest. I lay on top of one cart, head resting on fur, and scrolled through the chat channel to pass the time. People were complaining about how quickly stone axes broke. One guy told a story about pulling up his fishing net and finding it full of skeletons clutching stone axes. He buried the bones, bowed to them twice, and sold the fish to someone else without mentioning it. The buyer found out and was furious. I had a feeling those skeletons in the river might have been some of my missing workers who wandered too far. I noticed the guy complaining about skeletons in his fishing net was named Zhongbin. The kobold camp sat near a stream, and my dead skeletons from the battle must have washed downstream into his nets. That meant his territory wasn't far from mine. Something worth remembering. Back at my territory, all the looted goods sorted themselves automatically into storage. I had the skeletons carry the bed into my cabin and sent the fur rug and blankets to the river for washing. Then I opened the crafting menu and made iron axes. One craft gave me 808 after amplification, plus 505 more stone pickaxes. I reorganized my entire workforce. Around 1,400 worker skeletons remained after battle losses. I split 900 of them onto stone quarrying with pickaxes, since undead buildings needed more stone than wood, and put 500 on tree cutting with iron axes. The leftover iron axes went to my skeleton soldiers as weapon upgrades, replacing their stone axes. I also pulled 200 soldiers off patrol duty and assigned them to push carts, shuttling resources between work sites and the warehouse. Much more efficient than having workers walk back and forth. I hung the wash fur blankets on a pole to dry. Tonight I'd finally sleep in a real bed. I threw my old grass pile into the warehouse with great satisfaction. Next I checked the new marketplace blueprint. It cost 800 wood, 500 stone, and 220 rope, nothing fancy. I built it immediately. A 2-story wooden building appeared, with a fenced yard beside it. Then the system asked if I wanted to accept a merchant caravan from an undead faction leader called Otis, the Bone King. Apparently, the marketplace let me trade with native forces of this world, not just other lords. But it required influence points, and I had exactly 200 from being first to upgrade my main building. I accepted. A countdown appeared, almost 12 hours, and a glowing green grave mound popped up in the yard. The caravan was literally going to crawl out of a grave. At this point, that didn't faze me at all. For dinner I stuck with roasted meat again. I'd gotten an iron pot from the kobolds, but considering they cooked humans in it, I decided to pass. While eating, I browsed the chat channel. Everyone was complaining about stone tools breaking after chopping 2 or 3 trees. Then someone posted an offer. Iron axes for sale at 8 iron or 50 meat each. The channel erupted in anger. People called him a scammer and a price gouger. The actual crafting cost was only 2 iron and 2 wood, so his markup was enormous. But the seller pushed back hard, arguing that speed meant survival and anyone who wanted to live should pay up. That shut most people down, because he wasn't wrong. Then my private messages pinged. It was from the iron axe seller himself, a guy named Yao Yang. A private message came in from Yao Yang, the guy selling iron axes at ridiculous prices. He didn't even ask if I wanted to buy. He just asked how many. He figured I was the only person rich enough to afford his 50 meat per axe price tag. Then, before I could refuse, he posted in the public channel claiming I'd already agreed to buy a large batch. He was using my name to pressure everyone else into thinking the axes were worth that price. I wasn't going to be anyone's marketing tool. I posted publicly. I hadn't bought anything from him and had no intention to. The channel turned on him immediately. He sent me a furious private message calling me names and threatening me. I barely cared. Instead, I decided to really ruin his day. I crafted 101 iron axes with my amplification and listed 100 for sale at just 4 iron each, half his price. People who'd already bought from him demanded refunds. He had no choice but to give them back, since making enemies of that many people in a lawless world was suicide. He sent me another angry message. I ignored it. In this world, threats mean nothing without the strength to back them up. The iron axe sales brought in some good trades. Several people offered blueprints instead of iron. I picked up designs for wooden buckets, wooden benches, a drying rack for preserving meat, and a simple single bed, though I didn't need the bed since I'd already scored a real double bed from the kobolds. Dong Jieyue contacted me again too, trading more shadow stones for 10 iron axes this time instead of food. I posted another 2,000 meat for sale, then went to bed, my actual bed now, with fur blankets. The difference from sleeping on straw was incredible. Morning of day 3. The air here was cleaner than anything from my old world. I lit the fire, grilled breakfast, posted food for sale, and started building the drying racks I'd gotten the blueprint for. One craft gave me 101 racks. I assigned a skeleton to hang meat on them for preservation. These skeletons were strange, barely any intelligence, yet they executed tasks with mechanical precision, hanging exactly 3 pieces of meat per rack without being told. Then the notification came. The bone merchant caravan had arrived at my marketplace. I grabbed a few skeleton soldiers as escorts and headed over. The grave mound from yesterday had fully formed, and sitting beside it was an elaborately dressed skeleton in flowing robes, leaning on a wooden staff, gemstone rings on its bony fingers, blue ghostlight flickering in its empty eye sockets. When it saw I was human, the light in its eyes flickered with surprise. But it quickly composed itself and murmured something about the undead god accepting all believers. Then it stood and bowed. "My lord, rule is at your service." I froze. This skeleton could talk. I was shocked that this skeleton could speak, and not just speak, but show emotions and act like a polished nobleman. None of my skeletons had ever made a sound. Rule bowed gracefully and called me, "My lord." The contrast between his refined manners and his bare-bones body was something else. He tapped his staff on the ground, and a bone-framed shelf rose up from the underground passage beneath the grave. 6 items were displayed, all priced in war coins. 3 white-tier blueprints, an iron sword for 5 coins, a leather helmet for 3, and metal parts for 2. Then 3 special items. A green-tier organ jar for 50 coins, an ancient undead container for storing powerful creatures' organs to strengthen armies or perform rituals. A skill book called Divine Possession for 120 coins. It let me take control of an undead soldier's body and fight through it, with better results the lower the host's intelligence. Since my skeletons had basically 0 intelligence, the compatibility would be perfect. And finally, a blank map for 2 coins that would automatically record terrain as I explored, replacing my crude wooden board sketches. I wanted everything. My war coins were limited, just the system reward from being first to upgrade plus what I'd looted from the kobold camp, but it was exactly enough to buy all 6 items. Rule seemed pleased with my spending. The blueprints went into my lord's book. The map created a new 5th page alongside resources, crafting, buildings, and channel. The skill book dissolved into light and entered my body. The organ jar was a creepy clay pot with golden patterns and a metal skull for a lid. I asked Rule when he'd bring new goods. 7 days. The shop refreshed weekly. I also asked if I could sell items through the marketplace, thinking my amplification could print money. But no, I'd need my own registered merchant caravan first. No exploiting the system that easily. After a bit more small talk, Rule bowed and disappeared into the grave crack. A 7-day countdown appeared above it. I actually felt lonely watching him go. He was the first person, skeleton, I'd had a real conversation with since arriving. I should have bought things one at a time, just to stretch the chat. Maybe next time I'd ask him about his personal life. Do skeleton merchants have families? How do you tell male skeletons from female ones? Shaking that off, I went to the barracks. I had 122 writhing spines from the kobold battle. I recruited all of them at once. and the amplification gave me 12,322 new skeleton soldiers. The territory was instantly packed wall to wall with bones. Before I could even assign them tasks, a private message came in from Dong Jiayue. She'd explored down to the 3rd floor of her nearby tomb and run into undead creatures. She wanted to borrow some iron axes on credit to use as weapons. Dong Jiayue had decent luck. Her territory sat near mountains with plenty of wood and stone, and she'd grown up learning martial arts from her grandfather's school. She'd found an ancient tomb near her territory and had been exploring it for blueprints and shadow stones. But today she hit the 3rd floor and ran into undead creatures. 2 of her militia soldiers died and she got hurt, leaving her with just 3 fighters plus herself. She messaged me asking to borrow iron axes as weapons. I decided to do better than that. I sent her 4 real single-edged swords and 4 wooden shields instead. She was stunned. She hadn't expected actual weapons. I figured it was a smart investment. She was my only source of shadow stone right now, so keeping her alive and exploring that tomb was in my best interest. Besides, we'd traded several times and I genuinely didn't want anything bad to happen to her. With that settled, I turned to arming my massive new army. I had over 12,000 skeleton soldiers to equip. Using the iron sword blueprint from the merchant, plus the leather helmet blueprint, I started crafting. The amplification turned everything into enormous batches. Over 13,000 iron swords, 13,000 wooden shields, 13,000 leather armors, and 14,000 leather helmets. My skeletons grabbed their gear and suited up. Then I tested my new skill, Divine Possession. I grabbed a random skeleton soldier and activated it. Everything went black. My real body slumped over on the stone steps. And suddenly, I was looking through the skeleton's empty eye sockets, blue ghost fire flickering in them. The compatibility was 72%. I looked down at my bony hands, then back at my unconscious human body lying there. I told 2 skeletons to carry my body inside and put it on the bed. They picked me up, used my head to push the door open, and tossed me onto the mattress. I kicked both of them. These idiots were going to give me brain damage. I assigned the bulk of my soldiers to patrols and resource hauling, then picked about 2,000 to come exploring with me. My new map page would automatically record terrain as I moved through it. And the beauty of Divine Possession was that my real body stayed safe behind a protection shield while I took all the risks in a disposable skeleton body. A no-lose deal. Meanwhile, trouble was brewing. At the destroyed kobold camp, the chieftain had returned from a trading trip to find his home ransacked. Every resource, every piece of furniture, gone. His scouts followed the cart tracks straight to my territory and reported back, thousands of undead. Too many to fight alone. So the chieftain sent messengers to a group called the Fireblade Tribe, inviting them to join forces and raid my wealthy village together. Completely unaware of the kobold chieftain plotting against me, I kept exploring with my skeleton body and 2,000 soldiers. 2 hours in, we'd already bagged 5 wild boars and 3 one-horned goats. The animals in this world were enormous. 2 boars filled an entire cart. I was hacking through thorny bushes with my iron sword, enjoying the feeling of exploring without any real risk to myself, when a furious roar shook the ground. A massive red-furred bear, a 3rd-tier jungle giant bear, came charging straight at me. It happened so fast, I barely got my shield up before its paw slammed into me. I went flying through the air and crashed into a tree. My shield was smashed in half and 2 ribs were broken. Luckily, in a skeleton body, I couldn't feel pain and could still move fine. My soldiers swarmed the bear. With iron swords and shields, they actually dealt real damage now. The bear was powerful though. Every swipe sent skeletons flying with shattered bones. I threw away my broken shield, grabbed my sword, and charged back in. Eventually, I found an opening and stabbed into a weak spot under its tail, twisting the blade until it died. That thing was terrifying. If I'd been there in my real body, that first hit would have killed me or left me crippled with no hospital anywhere. We loaded the bear onto a cart and searched nearby, finding its cave. Inside were old bones of animals and humanoids. One set of remains caught my eye, an adventurer's skeleton with a ruined backpack. When I picked it up, the bag fell apart and dropped a hand-drawn map labeled Dragon Burial Cave. This adventurer had been heading there, but got eaten by the bear along the way. I told my skeletons to bury him properly. They tried to lift the skeleton and it fell apart into scattered bones. They picked up the pieces and buried them outside. Deeper in the cave was a wooden chest containing a stone hoe blueprint, a bathtub blueprint, and one natural gem, a rare resource needed for high-tier recruitment and special buildings. Valuable stuff, though the name felt wrong for someone in the undead faction. Shadowstone suited us better. I released divine possession back at the territory. My soul returned to my body on the bed, and the first thing I felt was a big lump on my head from where those idiot skeletons had rammed my skull into the door earlier. Next time I'd lie down properly before possessing anyone. I butchered all the hunting spoils, boars, goats, and the giant bear, earning thousands of meat, hides, and bones. The Dragon Burial Cave map merged with my territory map when it touched the Lord's Book, revealing a mountain region far to the north. Too distant to reach through unexplored fog right now, but worth remembering. As evening came, I posted food for sale. Thousands of units, gone instantly, as always. People were messaging me if I was even a few minutes late, worried I'd died. Then a familiar trader contacted me, the same guy who'd sold me the leather armor blueprint days ago. This time he had an iron pot blueprint. I offered 3 iron axes for it, which seemed fair. The iron pot blueprint deal worked out nicely. The seller even asked me to craft one for him using his own materials, which I agreed to. With my amplification, one craft gave me 101 pots anyway. I kept 3 for myself and listed the rest for sale at 5 iron each. Then I had a skeleton boil water, crafted 101 bathtubs, and took my first real bath since arriving in this world. The relief was incredible. I decided to hold off selling the extra bathtubs until tomorrow. Putting too many goods on the market at once might attract unwanted attention. While cooking dinner, actual soup in my new pot this time, I checked the chat channel. Someone was going crazy because their iron pot turned vegetable soup into something that tasted like rich meat broth. People started speculating about hidden properties. I realized that was probably the kobold pot I'd sold, the one that had been used to cook meat for years, including human meat. The seasoning had soaked into the iron. All my listed pots sold out instantly as people scrambled to find one with that special trait. Day 4. I started a morning exercise routine, jogging around the territory, sit-ups, basic stuff. My muscles had been getting soft since arriving, which worried me. After breakfast, I laid down on the bed, used divine possession on a skeleton, and headed out with 2,000 soldiers to continue mapping. West across a plain, we ran into 3 humanoid creatures made of twisted wood and vines. Lostwood elemental spirits, 3rd-tier summoned beings with no master. They attacked everything that came near. When my skeletons charged, the spirits grew vines from the ground to grab and hold them. But with 2,000 soldiers, a few vine snares meant nothing. My troops overwhelmed all 3 spirits, which dissolved into green light. They dropped a natural gem and 3 units of Earth's trace. The skeletons found a black iron chest nearby. Inside was the best haul yet, a green-tier spirit field building blueprint for growing crops at accelerated speed, a green-tier mind. Necklace that boosted mental energy recovery. Perfect for me since divine possession drained my spirit, plus 5 more natural gems, 1 forest trace, and 15 war coins. The spirit field blueprint was especially exciting. Up until now, all my food came from hunting and trading. Being able to actually farm would change everything. The spirit field was different from a regular farm, better soil, faster crop growth. After 4 days of nothing but unseasoned roasted meat, the idea of growing actual vegetables was exciting. We lost 8 skeleton soldiers fighting those with spirits. I had the survivors swap out their broken shields for intact ones from the fallen, and we pressed on exploring. Meanwhile, things I didn't know about were happening at the destroyed kobold camp. The kobold chieftain had called for help from a group called the Fireblade Tribe. Real orc warriors, 2 meters tall, violent by nature, living for war and plunder. Their leader was a young orc named Kadwa, the tribe chief's son, known for his terrible temper. When Kadwa's scout reported that my village was behind an energy shield, Kadwa flew into a rage and nearly killed the kobold chieftain for wasting his time. But then a human voice interrupted. A man named Zhuang Hong stepped forward, a fellow lord from Earth who'd been unlucky. His territory had been discovered by the Fireblade tribe on day 2. Unable to fight them off, he'd negotiated and become their vassal, gathering resources for the orcs in exchange for survival. Now he saw an opportunity. He told Kadwa that the shield meant this was another human lord's village, and if they could lure the lord outside and kill him, the shield would drop. Kadwa liked the plan and promised Zhuanghong more power within the tribe if he succeeded. I knew nothing about any of this. By evening I returned from exploring, having hunted a large haul, 7,500 meat, for 150 hides, 300 bones after butchering. Demand for food was still enormous. People weren't just feeding themselves anymore. They had soldiers and farmers who needed food to maintain loyalty and stamina. I built the spirit field using the green tier blueprint. It cost a lot, 1,500 wood, 800 stone, 300 rope, 5 natural gems, and 1 earth's trace. A wooden fence appeared around a neat 10 by 10 meter plot of soft, tilled soil. The only problem, I had no seeds to plant yet. Back at the cabin, I sat on my new wooden bench cooking soup and browsing the chat. Some guy had been bitten by a wolf and was panicking about the wound. Others were joking about it until someone gave him serious first aid advice. Wash the wound with clean water and squeeze out the contaminated blood. Then he messaged me privately, begging to trade for an iron pot so he could boil water to clean his injury. The wounded lord messaged me begging for an iron pot to boil water for cleaning his wolf bite. I wasn't about to charge a guy bleeding out, so I gave him one for free. He insisted on trading something in return, a bone arrow blueprint. It was the lowest quality arrow type, practically useless, but I appreciated the gesture. I took it and filed it away. The blueprint reminded me that I already had a crossbow design from earlier rewards. Combined with the metal parts blueprint from the skeleton merchant, I could actually craft ranged weapons now. Crossbows would be perfect for my dumb worker skeletons. The weapon did the damage, not the user's skill. But there was no urgent need, so I shelved the idea for later. I posted 5,000 units of food for sale, then asked in the public channel if anyone had crop seeds. The chat froze for a few seconds before erupting. People couldn't believe I was already moving into agriculture while they were still struggling to eat raw meat. The conversation quickly derailed into jokes about fertilizer and food safety. Several people messaged me privately. One had 20 potatoes and wanted just 8 meat for them. I agreed without haggling. No point being stingy over small amounts when I had warehouses full of food. Others sold me garlic and chili pepper seeds. Finally, some flavor in my future. I crafted stone hose, 101 after amplification, way more than I needed for one small field. I assigned a worker skeleton to farming duty. Honestly, I was nervous. I'd grown up in a city and knew nothing about agriculture. But the skeleton walked to the spirit field and started planting with expert precision, cutting potatoes into chunks and burying them at perfect intervals. A countdown appeared over each planted spot, 7 days to harvest. The spirit field was incredible, a full crop cycle in just 1 week. After planting everything, I did my evening exercise routine. Staying healthy mattered as much as building the territory. During my 3rd set of sit-ups, 2 skeletons marched up and dropped a dead wild boar right next to me, kicking dirt and dust into my face. I cursed at them, but they just walked away without a glance. Then I noticed something tied to the boar's tail, a piece of smooth animal hide with Chinese characters written on it. Brother, I'm a lord near your territory. Come out and talk. Let's help each other. I'm waiting in front of the eastern forest. It was clearly from another human lord who discovered my territory, but was afraid to approach because of all my skeletons. Seemed reasonable enough on the surface. But something felt wrong. It was already getting dark. Our territories couldn't be that close if it took 4 days to find me. Yet this person wanted to meet now, at night, when traveling was most dangerous. That meant they had somewhere nearby to stay. To the east, my mind went straight to the kobold camp. I examined the wild boar carefully before butchering it. The wounds were deep, too deep for any human lord to make at this stage. In the cracked tusk, I found a coarse red hair, nothing like human hair. Whatever killed this boar was strong and bestial. The friendly neighbor story felt more and more like a trap. Night fell. I wasn't going to walk out there in my own body like an idiot. Instead, I dressed up a skeleton in layers of clothing, stuffed it with straw to look human-shaped, and used divine possession to control it. I brought 2 skeleton soldiers as escorts and headed toward the eastern forest. A man stood there holding a torch. He introduced himself as Zhuanghong and greeted me warmly. I looked him over and got straight to the point. I know you have people hiding. Tell them to come out. He tried to act confused, but before either of us could say another word, a blade flew from the bushes and punched straight through my skeleton body, pinning it to a tree. Hundreds of orc warriors burst from the undergrowth and hacked my 2 escort skeletons to pieces. A young orc named Kedwa strolled out, smirking about killing a clever fool who walks into a trap he already suspects. But then they noticed my territory's shield hadn't disappeared. The working skeletons outside were calmly pulling back inside the barrier, not panicking. Kedwa's smile vanished. Zhuanghong rushed over and pulled the clothes off my corpse. Underneath was nothing but bones and straw. Not a human lord, just another skeleton in a costume. Kedwa was furious. They couldn't touch me as long as the shield stood, and they had no way to get me out now that I knew their game. He ordered a retreat back to the kobold camp, planning to post guards outside my territory the next day. What they didn't notice was one small skeleton following their torchlight all the way back. That was me. I tracked them to confirm what I'd suspected. They were based at the old kobold camp. Then I released the possession and woke up in my bed. I rubbed my temples. I was tired, but there was no time to rest. These orcs and that traitor Zhuanghong weren't going to stop, and I wasn't going to sit around waiting for their next move. I got up, lit the fire, and started crafting through the night. First, metal parts, 101 after amplification. Then crossbows. I selected 20 sets and got 2,020 light crossbows, green tier weapons with 2nd level damage. I tested one on a skeleton, worked perfectly. Then I mass-produced bone arrows, 10,100 of them, piled into a small mountain on the ground. I armed every worker skeleton with a crossbow, checked all my soldiers' weapons and shields, replacing damaged equipment, loaded arrows onto carts. Everything was ready. I lay back down and activated Divine Possession one more time. Blue ghost fire ignited in a skeleton soldier's chest. I gave the order. My entire army marched out of the territory toward the kobold camp. At that very camp, the orcs were settling down for a late dinner in makeshift tents. Over 2,000 of them crammed into the space, exhausted from a failed ambush. Inside the chieftain's hall, Kedwa and Zhuanghong were eating. Zhuanghong, struggling to swallow the orc's foul meat stew, was already pitching his next scheme. Used the same trick on other human lords. Even the kobold chieftain gave him a strange look. Orcs killed each other for power all the time, but even they found it unusual how eagerly this human betrayed his own kind. They had no idea what was coming their way in the dark. My army arrived at the kobold camp in the dead of night. The worker skeletons with crossbows opened fire first. Bone arrows rained down on the camp like a storm, piercing tents and cutting down orcs everywhere. The barrage lasted over 10 minutes straight. The cheap bone arrows shattered on impact, but that didn't matter when you had 10,000 of them falling like hail. When the arrows finally stopped, Kedwa climbed the wall and saw my crossbow skeletons lined up in the moonlight. He flew into a rage and rallied his surviving warriors, about 1,000 of them, to charge out and fight. That was exactly what I wanted. The moment they poured out of the gates, my skeleton soldiers stepped out from both sides of the road. The forest was full of them, tens of thousands holding iron swords and shields. 20,000 against 1,000. The orc charge was swallowed whole. All I could hear were furious howls fading into silence. Half an hour later, every last orc was dead, including Kedwa. Not one survivor. I walked into the camp in my skeleton body and found Zhuanghong hiding in a corner, shaking uncontrollably. Zhuanghong, right? Any last words? I asked him quietly. He begged. He cried. He called me a fellow countryman. He said he had no choice, that his territory spawned near the orc tribe, and he just wanted to survive. He offered me his territory, his loyalty, anything. None of it mattered. If his plan had worked, I'd be the dead one, and he'd be celebrating with the orcs. People like him don't forget grudges. They just wait for the next opportunity. I told him if he could return to Earth after dying, he should send me a message in a dream. Then I cut his throat. I picked up his lord's book, but couldn't use it in my skeleton body. I set it aside. Then I stripped his clothes off the corpse, jacket, pants, sneakers. Not out of cruelty, just practicality. We all arrived with only the clothes on our backs, and I had no way to wash or replace mine. His shoes were especially nice. As for wearing a dead man's clothes, in a world where I kill people to survive, that was the least of my concerns. I had his body buried. Maybe in another life, we'd all wake up back on Earth. Dawn was breaking. My head throbbed, partly from exhaustion, partly from using divine possession for too many hours straight. My mental energy was running dangerously low. I gave the skeletons their cleanup orders and released the possession. Back in my real body, I drank some water and collapsed into sleep. I slept until noon. My stomach was screaming. Every skeleton was still at the kobold camp, so the territory was eerily quiet, just me and mountains of resources. I grilled some meat, posted food for sale, and checked my messages. A bunch of people were asking if I'd died since I hadn't listed anything all morning. One guy even asked for my territory coordinates so he could claim the inheritance. In the chat, Zhang Bin was at it again. He'd fished out another net full of skeletons, this time with leather armor and helmets attached. He was thrilled about the free gear for his soldiers. That confirmed what I'd suspected. His territory sat downstream from the kobold camp. My battle casualties kept floating right into his fishing nets. After eating, I possessed a skeleton and returned to the camp to inspect the spoils. The haul was massive. 1,742 writhing spines, 120 iron, 80 hides, 50 war coins. Over 2,000 orc machetes, hundreds of leather and iron armor pieces, boots, helmets. For crates of fruit, 42 units of salt, finally some flavor for my food. And a map to somewhere called the Manom Market, a peaceful orc trading hub where fighting was forbidden. That could be useful for earning more war coins before the skeleton merchant returned in 5 days. The biggest prize sat apart from everything else. A complete purple tier armor set called the Bloodthirst set, taken from Kedwa's body. 5-level defense with a special effect. Every enemy killed boosted my strength by 1% for 8 seconds, stackable up to 50 times. When I shook out the gauntlets, an orc finger fell out. The skeletons had apparently ripped the gloves off along with whatever was still inside them. I checked the boots too, thankfully clean. We loaded everything onto carts and marched back to the territory. Seeing the world through skeleton eyes was always dreary. Everything looked pale and colorless, like the underworld. Returning to my own body and seeing actual colors again felt like a gift. Being alive was good. This battle's rewards were extraordinary. The writhing spines alone could produce a terrifying number of soldiers through amplification, and the newbie protection period was almost over. I needed every skeleton I could get. Then I picked up Zhuang Hong's Lord's Book. It glowed and dissolved into my own book like a blueprint absorbing into the pages. A prompt appeared. I now had control over Zhuang Hong's territory. 2 options, occupy or abandon. Occupying would make it a secondary territory I could develop. Abandoning would give me 50 to 80% of its resources, but destroy the territory entirely. I checked the map before deciding what to do with Zhuang Hong's territory. It sat far to the east, right next to the orc tribe's territory, way too distant to defend or manage. I chose to abandon it. The system returned 80% of its resources and 50% of its building materials, all teleported directly to my territory in a flash of light. Then came an unexpected bonus. My Lord's Book leveled up to level 2. I gained a small boost to marching speed and resource gathering, plus 10 extra daily messages in the chat channel. It also unlocked 3 new blueprints, torches, a ranch, and a lumber yard. These came from Zhuang Hong's work as an orc vassal. The orcs had given him resource-gathering blueprints to make him more productive for them. Now all of it was mine. I realized something important. Killing another lord and absorbing their book was incredibly rewarding. Not just their resources, but the level up and new unlocks. If this rule became public knowledge, lords would start hunting each other aggressively. I decided to keep quiet about it. In the chat channel, Zhang Bin had become a celebrity. He'd followed the river upstream and found over a dozen sets of leather armor and helmets from my dead skeletons that had washed downstream during the orc battle. People were going crazy, calling him a genius, begging him to sell the gear. Some were even comparing him to me, saying he was the next big lord. I could only shake my head. Those were basic white tier items that had fallen off my casualties. If these people knew I was sitting on hundreds of orc weapons and a purple tier armor set, they'd lose their minds. Then Dong Jieyue messaged me. She'd been quiet for 2 days, and I'd been worried something happened to her. She was fine. She had 5 more shadow stones to trade. She tried to give them for free as payment for the weapons I'd lent her, but I put up 150 units of meat anyway. No point taking advantage of her. She told me about her progress in the tomb. The first 2 chambers had been easy, just loot and shadow stones. But deeper in, she'd run into undead skeletons. The weapons I'd given her made the difference. Without them, she couldn't have continued. She asked if I had any armor to spare. She tried buying from Zhang Bin, but couldn't agree on a price. I almost laughed. Zhang Bin was selling gear that had fallen off my skeletons' bodies, while I had warehouses full of orc equipment. I told her I'd get something ready for her. Dong Jieyue was stunned when I casually asked how many sets of armor she needed. In the chat channel, people were losing their minds over Zhang Bin finding a dozen pieces of basic leather gear in the river, while I was sitting on hundreds of orc weapons and armor sets without saying a word. She asked for 7 sets. I gave her 6 sets of leather armor with helmets, plus 1 set of orc iron armor, the better stuff, for her personally. She was my only Shadowstone supplier, so keeping her well protected was just good business. She tried to pay with food and wood, but I told her to consider it in advance again. Basic resources meant nothing to me at this point. My territory was drowning in them. I'd had to fence off an entire area behind my cabin just to store the overflow. What I needed were rare materials, blueprints, and special items. I tried on the Bloodthirst armor set next. Couldn't wear it. The thing weighed as much as carrying an ox. I possessed a skeleton soldier and tried again. Same problem. The armor was built for massive orcs, not bony skeletons or regular humans. No amount of protein powder would get me there. I stored it away for later. With my new blueprints, I built a ranch on a flat stretch outside the territory, empty for now, but ready for livestock once I caught some. Then I built a lumber yard near the forest edge, which boosted wood gathering efficiency by 5%. The torch blueprint I skipped entirely. My skeletons didn't need light to work at night, and I just slept through darkness anyway. I still had over 1,700 writhing spines in storage, enough to recruit 100,000 skeleton soldiers with my amplification. But I held off. That many skeletons roaming around would attract too much attention. Better to save them for when the newbie protection ended. With daylight remaining, I possessed a skeleton and took 2,000 soldiers exploring south. The forest grew thick and lush, a good future logging spot. Then I spotted a young one-horned goat grazing in a clearing. I checked underneath. Female. Perfect. I could raise it at the ranch and eventually have goat milk. I ordered my skeletons to surround it and capture it alive. Easier said than done. The little goat sensed danger, bolted, and headbutted one of my skeletons so hard it flew backward through a row of bushes. We chased the thing for 20 minutes before losing it completely. But where the goat had disappeared, something else stood waiting. Through the thorns and wild roses rose an ancient castle, wrapped in creeping vines. Gloomwind Castle. The castle looked ancient, towering gray walls covered in dark green vines. The young goat was forgotten instantly. I made sure all 2,000 of my soldiers were accounted for, then ordered the gates opened. The rusted doors groaned apart, revealing a courtyard choked with dead leaves, wild grass, and tombstones wrapped in vines. A graveyard inside a castle. Of course. Then I spotted it, grayish-white crystals sitting beside the tombstones. Shadow stones. Several of them, just lying there. This matched exactly what Dong Jieyue had described about finding them in her tomb. I sent a skeleton to grab one. The moment it stepped toward the tombstones, the ground started bubbling like boiling water. Rotting corpses clawed their way up, flesh falling off, crawling with maggots, white dead eyes staring, mouths gaping open. The smell was awful. I was glad my troops were clean skeletons and not something like these things. They were called corpse walkers, first-tier cannon fodder from something called the Eternal Night Legion. Over 100 crawled out. I tried talking to them. Hey, we're all dead here, want to chat? But they just charged faster. My skeletons tore through them easily. Better weapons, better gear, overwhelming numbers. I personally fought one, splitting its skull with my sword. The thing didn't even flinch, kept swinging at me with a rusted blade until I hacked its head off. The loot was worth it. 5 shadow stones, 1 death trace, some kind of rare material, 122 broken machetes with a warning about tetanus, and a key to the castle's 2nd level. Good thing my troops were skeletons and couldn't get infections from rusty weapons. The battle also reminded me of a real weakness. My units were all first tier. A single second-tier enemy could fight 4 or 5 of mine without trouble. I needed to upgrade my barracks to unlock stronger troops. I used the key on the inner gate and led everyone into the second level. This area looked like a proper Western castle, all stone, white roses creeping through the windows. And the enemies were no longer mindless rotting corpses. Zombie spearmen rose from their graves. Second tier, organized, disciplined. They wore corroded armor, held metal spears, and actually formed up in ranks. They raised tattered flags that were too old to read, lined up in formation, and advanced toward us in unison. These things had training. I spread my troops out and prepared for a real fight. The spearmen were smarter than the rotting corpses. They formed up in a square formation with spears pointing outward, a crude version of an ancient phalanx. But they still lacked a commander, so when my skeletons spread out and surrounded them, the formation just kept spinning in place, unable to decide which direction to face. I gave the attack order. My soldiers charged from all sides. The spears were deadly head-on. One skeleton got skewered through the ribs and launched into the air, flailing around on the end of a spear. But from the other 3 sides, my troops closed in and started hacking. I grabbed a spear shaft, pulled myself in close, and chopped at one's neck. The blood that oozed out was dark and thick like syrup, just hanging from the wound without dripping. Disgusting. We won, but it cost me over 30 soldiers. Even the skeleton I was possessing took a spear shaft to the shoulder that snapped a rib loose. My left arm dangled uselessly, unable to hold a shield. I tied it up with a strip of rotten flag cloth. The loot was solid: 7 shadow stones, 2 death traces, an iron spear blueprint, 324 rusty spears, and a key to the castle's inner chambers. I unlocked the main doors and stepped inside. My eyes went wide. The interior was nothing like the gloomy graveyard outside. It was a bright, lavish hall, polished floors, ornate wooden panels, copper lamp stands with glowing crystals, red carpet stretching into the distance. Stone pillars lined both sides, carved with intricate designs. On top of each pillar crouched a massive bat-like creature, motionless, eyes closed, muscles bulging beneath leathery wings. I couldn't tell if they were sleeping or dead. I sent a few skeletons down the carpet to test. They made it a few steps before the first creature's eyes snapped open. It shrieked, launched off its pillar, swooped down, snatched a skeleton mid-stride, and ripped it to pieces in the air. Bones rained down. Bloodthirst bat-wolves. 5th tier. The jump from 2nd tier spearmen to this was terrifying. All 6 of them woke up and dove into my troops. The hall was too narrow for my numbers to matter. Most of my army was stuck outside the doors. Inside, it was chaos. Each bat wolf tore through my skeletons with ease, ripping apart armor and crushing skulls. Worse, whenever one got hurt, it just flew up to the ceiling and waited for its wounds to dry before diving back in. I ordered my troops to cluster against a wall to avoid being scattered. That made me a target. One bat wolf abandoned its current kill and charged straight at me. I threw myself sideways as it slammed into the wall behind me, stunning itself for a moment. I screamed for every nearby skeleton to pile on. We carved into it with swords, opening wounds all over its body. Blood poured out, but it just screeched, spread its wings, and flew back up. Still alive. I'd already lost over 100 soldiers, and we'd barely scratched them. Fighting in this enclosed space was suicide. I ordered a full retreat. My skeletons backed out of the castle without looking back, and we slammed the heavy doors shut before the bat wolves could follow. I told a group of soldiers to hold the doors while I went back for reinforcements. I released divine possession and got up from bed. The bat wolves were 5th tier. My 1st tier sword and shield skeletons couldn't keep up with their speed, and the creatures could fly out of reach whenever they got hurt. I needed a completely different approach. I mass-produced 10,100 bone arrows, then had skeletons pull the 2,000 crossbows I'd stored in the warehouse from the orc battle. For melee, I grabbed the 221 kobold daggers and lashed them to long wooden poles with rope, making crude spears. I already had the iron spear blueprint, but it was sitting with my skeleton troops at the castle. I needed the Lord's book to craft from it, and the book was here with my real body. No time to wait, so improvised spears would have to do. I possessed a new skeleton and marched 3,000 soldiers to the castle with 10 cartloads of arrows and weapons. My original 1,000 were still guarding the doors, completely motionless and reliable as ever. I reorganized. 2,000 skeletons swapped their shields for crossbows. About 545 got spears, the makeshift ones plus the rusty iron spears looted from the zombie spearmen. The rest kept swords and shields. My plan was simple. The crossbows would pepper the bat wolves in the air, the spear wall would stop their diving attacks, and the swordsmen would finish them off when they crashed into the spears. We opened the doors. The 6 bat wolves were back on their pillars, eyes closed, resting. We poured in quietly. When they woke up and saw it was skeletons again, they roared with fury. "Shoot!" I yelled. 2,000 crossbows fired at once. The enclosed space gave the bat wolves nowhere to hide. Bone arrows riddled their bodies instantly. Enraged and bleeding, they dove at us. Spears up, the front ranks raised a forest of spear points. The lead bat wolf couldn't stop in time. It plunged straight into the spear wall. Its wings were pierced through, and it skidded into the center of my troops. The swordsmen swarmed it and hacked its head into pulp. The other 5 froze in horror. While they hesitated, my crossbow skeletons reloaded. Fire, another volley. Then another. After 4 rounds, the bat wolves were covered in arrows like porcupines, blood streaming everywhere. They finally snapped and charged in desperation. The spears caught them again, and the swordsmen finished the job. The whole fight took about an hour. All 6 fifth-tier bat wolves were dead. It felt almost unfair. They had overwhelming individual power, but I'd beaten them with tactics and combined arms. Crossbows forced them to move. Spears punished their charges. Swords delivered the killing blows. Any other lord at this stage would have been slaughtered by even one of these things. I had the bodies dragged outside, then ordered a thorough search of the hall. My skeletons flipped the place upside down and brought me something special, a building blueprint for a skeleton conversion field. The blueprint was called Skeleton Conversion Field, blue tier quality. It could take dead creatures or bones, bury them, and transform them into skeleton versions of whatever they were. After the first conversion, the building would remember that type and let me recruit more using writhing spines. A fantastic find, but I couldn't record it into my lord's book since the book was back at my territory with my real body. I tucked it away safely. I took 10 skeletons upstairs. The second floor was divided into small rooms. No space for an army, so a small team was all I could bring. We searched room by room. Everything was dusty and long abandoned, but nicely furnished. The last room was a study. Beautifully carved desk and chairs, heavy blue curtains, shelves lined with books. On the desk sat a golden lamp with a glowing stone, a nightlight stone, a mineral that absorbed light during the day and glowed softly in darkness. Basically a night pearl. I picked up a half-read book from the desk. The first line grabbed me. Life is a disease, but I have found the cure. A system prompt appeared. I'd collected clue 1 of 5 for something called the immortality elixir. In this world of magic and walking skeletons, eternal life wasn't necessarily fiction. Worth keeping an eye on. The book also taught me that the Eternal Night faction meant vampires, while my undead faction was called the Immortals. Both controlled undead beings, but they were separate factions. My skeletons ransacked the study, not gently, and turned up a teleportation scroll that could send me to any recorded location, a healing potion, 27 war coins, and 5 bloodstones. Bloodstones were like shadow stones, but for the vampire faction's buildings. Not useful to me directly, but rare enough to keep. We climbed to the 3rd floor. At the top of the stairs sat 2 fanged gargoyle statues covered in dust. Down the hall was a massive ornate door carved with flowers and figures. It was locked tight. I had my skeletons force it open. Through the crack, I saw a huge black coffin sitting in the center of the room. I told everyone to stop. Based on everything I'd seen, the bat wolves, the blood-themed decorations, the portraits on the walls, this castle belonged to a vampire of the Eternal Night faction. And that coffin in the master bedroom could easily have something sleeping inside it. Then again, we'd made an incredible amount of noise fighting downstairs and literally tore the front doors off. If anything was alive in there, it should have woken up already. I told my skeletons to wait at the door. I squeezed through the gap alone and crept toward the windows. I slipped inside the master bedroom. It was huge and luxurious. dominated by an ornate black coffin decorated with gold thread. I ignored it for now and went straight for the windows. My plan was simple. If a vampire was sleeping in that coffin, sunlight would deal with it. I pulled open every heavy curtain and unlatched the shuttered windows. Daylight flooded the room. I called my skeletons in and ordered them to open the coffin. They pried off the lid. Empty. No vampire inside. Just a beautiful blue-tier item called a fine corpse-nurturing coffin. Apparently lying in it could calm your mind and restore spiritual energy. Useful for vampires, not so much for me. I'd suffocate if I closed that lid. Maybe I could sell it to a vampire someday. In a hidden room next door, we found a golden treasure chest, my first one ever. I'd only seen wooden and black iron chests before. I rubbed my hands together, prayed to every deity I could think of, and opened it. The loot was incredible. A city wall blueprint, a guardian watchtower blueprint, a coffin crafting blueprint, a hardwood plank blueprint, 120 war coins, 40 bloodstones, and a blue-tier magic ring called the Flame Ring. The ring could shoot a fireball that dealt third-level damage with a burning effect on a 1-hour cooldown. I finally had some personal firepower. The wall blueprint was expensive but essential. My newbie shield would drop soon, and I'd need real defenses. The Guardian Watchtower was a special building that boosted any station unit's stats and let them sense all threats in the area. Perfect for placing in front of my lord's cabin once the shield disappeared. On my way out through the Great Hall, I tripped over a loose stone on the floor. When I checked it, the system labeled it as a stone brick, the exact building material I needed to upgrade my lord's cabin to level 4. Nobody in the entire chat channel had found stone bricks or a blueprint for them yet. I looked up at the castle walls around me. This whole structure was built from stone bricks. If I took the castle apart piece by piece, I'd have more stone bricks than I could ever use. I released divine possession and woke up back in my bed, rubbing my aching temples. The mental strain from hours of continuous possession and combat was brutal, but there was no time to rest. I walked outside, gathered all my worker skeletons, about 1,700 remaining after recent battles, and told them to grab their tools and carts. We were going to dismantle an entire castle. I led all my worker skeletons, about 1,700 of them, out to Gloomwind Castle with tools and carts. My territory already had more wood and stone than I could use, so I was pausing regular gathering to focus on dismantling the castle for stone bricks. Nobody else in the world had found these yet, and I needed them to upgrade my lord's cabin to level 4. This time I went in person instead of using divine possession. The mental exhaustion from yesterday's battles was too much, and the castle was cleared of monsters anyway. I rode on a cart while pointing directions for my skeletons. When we arrived, the courtyard was a mess. The skeleton soldiers had followed my order to bring everything outside, but they just dumped it all into a pile. A copper lampstand was crushed flat under furniture. They could follow the command to search and carry, but understanding how to handle things carefully was beyond them. I recorded all my new blueprints into the Lord's book and put on the flame ring. I tested it immediately, summoned a fist-sized fireball in my left palm, and launched it at a crumbling stone monument. The explosion snapped it in half, and the surface kept burning for about 3 minutes, even though there was nothing flammable. Impressive destructive power with a 1-hour cooldown. I put 1,700 workers on demolishing the castle, with 1,000 skeleton soldiers hauling materials back to the territory by cart, and the rest guarding against wandering beasts. On the ride back, I checked my messages. One person wanted to trade an earth trace for an iron pot, a good deal for me since that material was needed for special buildings. Another person wanted 15 iron axes at once and could pay 45 iron. That was unusual. Most people barely had a few units of iron. He explained he'd found an iron mining spot near his territory. He also asked if I had iron pickaxes, which I didn't have the blueprint for yet. Interesting contact to keep. As the carts approached my territory, I heard shouting and fighting in the distance. My skeletons don't yell, so someone else was involved. I jumped on top of a cart and looked. A group driving horse-drawn wagons had wandered too close to my territory and gotten surrounded by my patrolling skeleton soldiers. They were already taking heavy losses. I jumped down, told the cargo skeletons to keep moving, and walked toward the battle. Stop attacking. Surround them, I called out. Every skeleton froze mid-swing and formed a tight ring around the survivors. The The group my skeletons had surrounded turned out to be pig-headed humanoids, a merchant caravan from some village to the north. They had 5 horse-drawn wagons loaded with goods, heading to the Manom market to trade. What actually happened was simple. They'd spotted my territory and the huge piles of resources I'd fenced off outside, got greedy, and tried to steal some. My patrol skeletons caught them in the act and attacked. By the time I arrived, their 100-strong group was down to about 20 survivors. Their leader, a pigman named Parker, tried to spin it as a misunderstanding. I glanced at his wagons and saw my own supplies mixed in with his cargo. Furs, leather armor, bathtubs, tools. Not much of a misunderstanding. Parker quickly dropped the act and offered compensation. I sat down on a rock near my territory and started questioning him. I wanted information about this world more than anything. He told me they were heading to the Manom market, the same one from the map I'd taken from the orc camp. It was a peaceful trading hub built by orcs where fighting was forbidden and all transactions had to be voluntary. When I asked if anyone could visit, Parker eyed my skeleton army nervously and said it would be difficult. Then I got a business. I told him 1 cartload of goods wasn't enough. If I killed them all, everything would be mine anyway. What could he possibly offer that was worth letting them live? Parker started sweating heavily. His whole group went silent, faces dripping with panic. I gave them 1 minute to come up with something worthwhile. When the minute passed and nobody spoke, I ordered my skeletons to kill them. Wait, war coins, Parker screamed. We'll pay you war coins. I raised my hand and my skeletons froze. Now he had my attention. War coins were the universal currency of this continent. I'd been struggling to find a steady source of them, and here was someone offering exactly what I needed. Keep talking, I said. Parker didn't have the war coins on him. He proposed leaving their injured old captain, Bolton, as a hostage while the rest went back to their village to get the money. I checked the wagons, 2 loaded with furs, 1 with iron ore, 1 with my stolen supplies, and the last carrying Bolton on a pile of leather. The old pigman was weak, leg wrapped in bloody bandages. I agreed to the deal. They had until tomorrow morning. If the money didn't arrive, I'd kill Bolton and come find their village. Parker nodded so hard his huge head looked like a rattle drum. He gathered his remaining people and left quickly. What I didn't see was what happened after they walked away. Parker had no intention of coming back with money. He told his men to hide in the forest and wait until nightfall, then come back to take everything, including the goods they'd lost. As for the old captain, Parker wanted him dead anyway. With Bolton gone, nobody could challenge his leadership. He was using me to do his dirty work. Back at my territory, I assigned 20 skeleton soldiers to guard Bolton with orders to kill him if he tried anything. Then I got to work. The pigman's cargo added 120 iron and over 1,100 furs to my stockpile. I crafted the iron pots and axes I'd promised to people earlier, 101 pots from 1 craft, and completed both trades. Quick and easy. Then I turned to upgrades. The shadow stones from Gloomwind Castle finally let me improve my bone burial ground. I had enough to push it from level 1 straight to level 3. At level 3, a new unit type unlocked, Skeleton Spearman. I recruited 1 immediately. The amplification kicked in, 101 Skeleton Spearmen appeared. The Skeleton Spearmen looked similar to my regular soldiers, but their abilities were different. They specialized in spear and shield combat, with a thrust skill that dealt massive damage and could counter any charging attack. The castle battle had already proven how important unit variety was. Just swapping some swords for spears and crossbows had completely turned the tide against those 5th-tier Batwolves. Higher-tier units mattered, but the right mix of troops mattered just as much. I recruited 5 more times, getting 505 additional spearmen for a total of 606. I crafted shields and iron spears for all of them and sent them out to patrol and hunt. Then I started building. First, city walls. The newbie protection shield would vanish in 2 days, and I needed real defenses before that happened. I built the level 1 wall, just a 2-meter wooden fence around the territory. Not great. I immediately upgraded to level 2, taller, thicker. Then level 3, which cost a staggering amount of materials but turned the lower 3 meters into solid stone with thick logs on top, reaching about 5 meters high. Finally, something that looked like it could stop an attack. Soldiers could walk along the top for patrol duty. Next, I built the Guardian Watchtower in front of my lord's cabin. It was a special building that boosted any station unit's stats by 2% and let them sense all danger in the protected area. I assigned 2 skeleton soldiers to it. They walked over silently and stood at attention on either side, guarding my home. The percentage boost was small for now, but like all buildings, it could be upgraded later. I wanted to build the skeleton conversion field next, but my stomach started growling. It was already sunset. I lit the fire, sliced meat, and started grilling while browsing the chat channel. People were struggling with basic survival. One guy spent ages killing a single wolf with his soldiers. Another accidentally poisoned all his farmers with mushroom soup and was now playing nurse under a doctor's instructions. Some people with medical knowledge had started charging resources for health consultations. The world was slowly developing its own economy and social structure, crude as it was. Someone posted a request for spears or bows to fight aquatic monsters, offering a hardwood shield blueprint in exchange. Someone in the chat was offering a hardwood shield blueprint in exchange for spears or bows. Hardwood shields were a step above my regular wooden ones, same white tier, but sturdier. I messaged him and offered iron spears. He nearly lost his mind when he heard I had iron weapons. He wanted 13 spears for his 12 militia soldiers, but that was too much for a white tier blueprint. I countered, 3 proper iron spears plus 10 rusty iron spears from the castle, still better than bone or wood weapons, in exchange for the blueprint and 5 iron. He only had 3 iron and promised to pay the rest later. I agreed. We completed the trade, and he immediately went to the public channel raving about how amazing I was. The chat erupted with people begging for iron weapons. My reputation kept growing whether I wanted it to or not. After dinner, I ordered a skeleton to heat bath water. Having bathtubs, firewood, and free labor meant I could actually relax for once. Then I built the skeleton conversion field next to my barracks. It looked like a stone-lined pool filled with loose dirt, with a tall tombstone standing behind it. Unlike the barracks, this building didn't have preset units. You had to teach it by burying a creature's body. After the first conversion, it would remember the species and let you recruit more. I had 6 bat wolf corpses from the castle. I tossed one in. The soil turned soft like a swamp and slowly swallowed the body. A minute later, a skeletal version burst out and landed nearby. A skeleton giant bat, all white bone with translucent membranes on its wings for flight. But there were downsides. The original bat wolf was 5th tier, the skeleton version dropped to 3rd tier. Its body shrank from wolf size to about the size of a vulture. And the conversion didn't trigger my 100 times amplification, just 1 body in, 1 skeleton out. I converted all 6 bat wolves and got 6 skeleton giant bats. Not what I'd hoped for, but these were my first flying units. In a world where most of my troops were stuck on the ground, having eyes and claws in the sky was a gap I desperately needed to fill. After my bath, I stood in the open air letting the breeze dry me off. The night was warm and comfortable. Back inside, my cabin looked completely different now. Carpet on the floor, proper furniture, nightlight stone lamps casting a soft glow. All looted from the castle. Not bad for a guy who'd been sleeping on straw a few days ago. I lay in bed and decided to test my new flying unit. I used Divine Possession on one of the skeleton giant bats. The compatibility was only 45%, much lower than possessing a regular skeleton soldier, meaning it would drain my mental energy fast. But I just wanted a quick look around. Flying was tricky at first. Getting airborne was easy enough, but steering smoothly through obstacles took practice. After a few attempts, I got the hang of it. Felt like a VR flight simulator. I spread my bone wings and shot up above the territory to survey the area from the sky. That's when I spotted firelight flickering in the distant forest. My skeletons didn't need fire. Someone else was out there. I flew closer and recognized the wagon tracks on the ground. The pigmen. They hadn't left at all. I perched on a branch above their camp and listened. Parker, the guy who'd sworn to go fetch my money, was briefing his crew on a raid plan. He'd mapped out my skeleton patrol routes and planned to sneak in, steal my most valuable goods like the nightlight stones, carpets, and paintings, then set fire to my lumber stockpile on the way out. One pigman asked if the fire might be too much. Parker snapped at him. Their dead comrades needed to be avenged, and the human brat deserved a lesson. They had no intention of ever paying me. The old Captain Bolton was just a sacrifice Parker wanted dead anyway, so nobody would challenge his leadership. I flew back to my territory and prepared. Late that night, the pigmen crept out of the forest, dodged my patrols, and reached my supply area. They started stuffing valuables into bags, nightlight stones, carpets, paintings, whispering excitedly about how much money this would fetch. Then I yawned. Every pigman froze. They turned and saw me sitting on a rock nearby, watching them calmly. Skeleton spearmen were already closing in from all sides, forming a tight circle with spears pointed inward. Parker tried to talk his way out again. He promised to leave immediately, go get the money, come back properly. I told him this wasn't a game. I'd given them a chance, and they'd mistaken my generosity for stupidity. He tried to say something else, but I was done listening. Kill them. My skeletons surged forward like a wave. Parker screamed for everyone to charge toward one side and break through. Fighting and screaming tore through the quiet night. The fight lasted 20 minutes. Parker and 2 others broke through the encirclement, bleeding badly, and sprinted toward the forest. I stood up, raised my left hand, and launched a fireball from the flame ring. It hit Parker square in the back, blasting him off his feet. He didn't get up. His body burned on the ground. The last 2 kept running. My skeleton giant bats dove from the sky and tore them apart before they reached the trees. After it was over, I walked out. The smell of Parker's burning corpse actually made me hungry. It smelled like roasted meat. I had the skeletons strip all the bodies and toss them into the conversion field. The pigmen turned into basic first-tier skeleton soldiers. We also collected 27 orc machetes and 8 writhing spines. Then I sat down with the old pigman, Bolton, the hostage Parker had so generously left behind. I told him straight. All his former comrades were dead. He wasn't surprised. He'd heard the fighting. He told me the full story. He was the original captain. Parker had staged a mutiny during the trip, injured him, and taken over. The only reason Parker hadn't killed him outright was because Bolton knew the route to Manom Market. Leaving him as a hostage was Parker's way of getting me to do the killing for him. I asked why he'd stayed willingly. Bolton said the pigman village was too small. If everyone died here, the village would collapse. He'd sacrificed himself hoping the others would go home. That earned some respect from me. A selfless pigman. Who would have guessed? Bolton apologized for Parker's actions and begged me not to attack their village. I thought it over. What interested me wasn't revenge, it was opportunity. A pigman village meant a connection to the Manom market. With my amplification, I could mass-produce goods and sell them there for war coins. I told Bolton his village was safe, on one condition. He'd spend the night outside my territory, and tomorrow I'd tell him what I needed from him. I warned him not to try running. He agreed without hesitation. I left him a blanket and a skeleton guard, then went to bed. Morning of day 6. Tomorrow the newbie protection would end. That thought sat heavy in my chest. I did my morning routine, jogging, push-ups, sit-ups, then ordered bath water heated, lit the cooking fire, and posted food for sale. I had the skeletons bring Bolton inside the territory walls. The protection shield required my permission for outsiders to enter. He walked in nervously with a spear at his back, then bowed and waited for instructions. I invited Bolton to sit and eat breakfast with me. Over roasted meat, I asked him everything about the Manom market. He explained it used to be open to humans and dwarves, but now it was purely an orc trading hub. Going as an undead faction member would cause problems. Better to show up as a human. Weapons, slaves, and food crops sold best there since orcs were terrible at forging and farming. Even basic iron swords would be popular if I brought enough volume. I laid out my offer directly. I wanted Bolton to guide me to the market. Once we finished trading, I'd release him and pay him for his trouble. He didn't really have a choice, and he knew it. But he agreed without argument. I sent him outside the walls to wait while I prepared. Behind the high city walls, he couldn't see what I was doing, which was important. I opened the crafting menu and made 10 iron swords. The amplification gave me 1,010. Then I went to the barracks and started recruiting. I'd been sitting on over 1,700 writhing spines from the orc battle, untouched in storage. Now I spent them freely. 10,100 new skeleton soldiers and 20,200 skeleton spearmen. I crafted iron swords, iron spears, hardwood shields, and armor for all of them. When everything was ready, I marched out of the territory with over 30,000 skeleton troops, escorting 5 horse-drawn wagons loaded with iron swords. Bolton's jaw dropped. He'd just eaten breakfast with me inside those walls, and there had been nothing close to this many soldiers. Where had they all come from? I called him onto the wagon. He climbed on nervously and suggested that this many undead might cause panic. I told him not to worry. The caravan set off toward Manom Market. Meanwhile, at the Fireblade tribe's main base to the east, the kobold chieftain, the same one I'd defeated twice now, was kneeling on the floor of the orc great hall, trembling violently. He'd survived the night battle by hiding in the camp's waste pile. After days of hesitation, he'd come to report Kadwa's death to the boy's father. The tribe's chieftain, Kent, sat before him, a massive orc covered in scars and dark red tattoos, white-bearded, eyes full of killing intent. When he heard his son was dead, he smashed his stone table to pieces with one punch. "How come you didn't die?" he asked the kobold. Meanwhile, at the Fireblade tribe, the kobold chieftain, who'd survived by hiding in the camp's waste pile, was kneeling before Kent, the tribe's leader and Kadwa's father. Kent was a terrifying old orc covered in scars and tattoos. When he heard his favorite son was dead, he nearly killed the kobold on the spot. The kobold saved himself by lying, claiming Kadwa had hidden him and told him to deliver the message, begging his father to avenge him. Kent bought it mostly. He spared the kobold's life, but ordered him whipped for the disaster. He also sent scouts to find my territory. Trouble was coming, but I didn't know that yet. Bolton proved his worth as a guide. He steered us along safer roads, avoiding large beast dens that the map alone wouldn't have warned me about. During the journey, I possessed one of my giant bats and flew ahead for a look. I could see the outline of a city in the distance with caravans coming and going. Manom Market. Before reaching the city, I had my skeleton army stop and set up a defensive camp. Over 30,000 undead soldiers marching into an orc trading city would cause a panic. I linked the 5 wagons together, and Bolton and I drove them the rest of the way alone. The city walls were low and weathered. 2 Minotaur guards stood at the gate checking incoming traffic. Bolton explained that Manom was controlled by a Minotaur tribe led by a 5th-tier hero named Tyrock. Nobody dared start trouble here. One guard recognized Bolton and asked if he was selling goods. Bolton introduced me as a friend he was guiding. The guards were visibly shocked to see a human. Apparently none had visited in years. They inspected the cargo briefly, tossed us an entry token, and told Bolton to teach me the rules. Inside the city, we attracted attention immediately. A young human with wagons full of merchandise was unusual enough that a crowd of orcs started following us. By the time we reached the market and claimed a stall, a sizable audience had gathered behind us. Bolton pulled back the oilskin covers, revealing rows of gleaming iron swords. Then he started shouting like a born salesman. "Come take a look. Human forged weapons. Buy with coin or trade blueprints and rare materials." "Step right up." Bolton's shouting drew a crowd fast. Some orcs mocked him for working with a human, but curiosity won out. I priced the iron swords at 1 war coin each. Someone complained it was too expensive for basic weapons, but Bolton held firm. Market price, no bargaining. The first buyer purchased 100 swords without hesitation. After that, others started lining up. Within half an hour, over 300 swords were gone and war coins were piling up in the box behind me. Just days ago I'd been worrying about where to find war coins, and now they were flowing in like water. Then the trades got interesting. One orc offered a level 1 arrow tower blueprint for swords. I gave him 10, a building I didn't have yet, so it was worth it. He looked thrilled, which made me think I might have been too generous. Another traded a leather boot blueprint for 5 swords. Then someone handed me magic essence and Spring's trace, both rare special materials I actually needed for the spring of renewal building I'd unlocked on day 1. I traded 5 swords per item. The orc hesitated but accepted. Word spread about what I'd accept and trade. More orcs came with blueprints and special materials alongside their war coins. Business was flowing smoothly. Then a large orc threw a figure at my feet. "How many swords is she worth?" It was a young woman, but not human. She had long rabbit ears on her head and a small white tail. A rabbitkin. She was curled up on the ground, pale-faced and trembling, wearing rough cloth that barely covered her. She looked terrified. The orc explained that rabbitkin females weren't popular among orcs. Too human-looking, too fragile. But they sold well in human cities. He wanted 100 swords. I told him 50. He pushed for 90. I held at 50. He countered with 60, claiming he could get more selling her to a human city. I agreed to 60. He laughed, shoved her toward me, and handed over a slave certificate. She stood beside me shaking, biting her lip to keep from crying, tears pooling in her eyes. She was young, maybe just reached adulthood, tall, with long legs and a delicate face that looked nothing like the brutish orcs around us. I softened my tone. Stop crying. What's your name? Can you count? Master, my name is Ear. I can count, she whispered through quiet sobs. Ear, your job is to bundle and hand out swords to the customers. Yes, master. She wiped her tears and got to work. Ear turned out to be a quick worker. She bundled swords with rope while I collected payment, and Bolton kept shouting to attract customers. We fell into a smooth rhythm. 3 hours later, every sword was sold. The final tally, 742 war coins, 5 blueprints including an arrow tower, a fertility statue special building, leather boots, a longbow, and iron arrows. Plus a pile of rare materials, 12 natural gems, 3 magic essences, for Spring's traces, 2 Earth's traces, and 1 hunting's trace. Coming here was absolutely the right call. Each sword was cheap on its own, but selling over 1,000 of them added up to a fortune. I paid Bolton 50 war coins as promised. He was happy, enough to cover the cargo his mutinous crew had lost. He planned to buy supplies and head home. We said a brief goodbye, and he left to do his shopping. I was loading up the wagon to leave when a Minotaur patrol blocked my path. Their chief wanted to see me. My first instinct was suspicion, but their tone was polite, not threatening. They offered to guard my cargo while I visited. I agreed, partly because refusing seemed unwise, partly because I was curious to meet a hero-class figure. They led me deep into the city, past taverns and blacksmith shops, to a tribal-style building. Inside sat the most massive living thing I'd ever seen up close. Tyrock, the bronze bull, a purple tier, 5th-tier hero. Nearly 2.5 meters tall, bronze skin with a metallic sheen, chest muscles that looked like they could crush stone. I had zero doubt he could kill me with a single punch. He was surprisingly friendly. He'd had someone buy my swords, and was impressed by the consistent quality and volume. He assumed I had a large team of blacksmiths, and I let him believe that without correcting him. Then he got to business. He wanted to order 3,000 battle axes, not the light iron swords, but heavy weapons suited for Minotaur warriors. The problem was I didn't have a battle axe blueprint. Before I could feel too embarrassed, Tyrock laughed and offered to provide the blueprint himself as a down payment. The axes were green-tier quality, requiring 12 iron per unit, far more than normal weapons, built for massive hands. The price, 8 war coins per axe. That was 24,000 war coins for the full order. He asked how quickly I could deliver. I told him 3 days. He studied me hard. 3,000 heavy axes in 3 days was an insane timeline, and he was clearly wondering how many smiths I commanded. But I said it with confidence, and he accepted. He handed me the blueprint. I thanked him, walked out, and found Ear sitting obediently on the wagon. Nobody stole our money? I asked, climbing up. No, master. Good. Let's go. I drove the wagon out of the city, heading back to rejoin my skeleton army and get home. I had 3 days to produce 3,000 battle axes and deliver a fortune's worth of weapons to a Minotaur warlord. With my amplification, the crafting would take minutes. The real challenge was gathering enough iron. On the road back, I chatted with Ear to learn more about her. Her village had been attacked, the survivors scattered, and she'd been captured and sold into slavery. No family left. I told her I was alone too, and that people should look forward, not back. She glanced up at me for just a second before looking down again. A system notification popped up. Ear's loyalty had risen by 5 points to 75. I'd almost forgotten about the loyalty system. My skeletons didn't have emotions, so it never came up. I checked her stats. She was 1st tier with some interesting abilities: natural agility, a danger-sensing trait called Alert, combat skills, a spinning kick attack, and, most exciting, a chef skill. She could cook real meals that boosted morale for living beings. After days of plain roasted meat with no seasoning, that skill alone was worth every sword I'd paid for her. We were almost at the skeleton camp when Ear's long ears twitched. She looked terrified and told me people were approaching fast from the left. I couldn't hear or see anything through the trees, but her alert ability was real. I told her to watch over my body, then used divine possession on a giant bat at the camp. From the air, I could see everything. Driving the wagon below, and behind the tree lean to the left, about 20 orcs sprinting toward us. They'd watched me sell 1,000 swords for war coins and decided to rob us on the road where Manom's rules didn't apply. Just a human and a rabbit girl with a box full of money. Easy prey. I flew back down and quickly positioned my skeleton army inside the mountain pass. Releasing the possession, I took the reins and deliberately steered the wagon off the main road, straight into the narrow pass where my troops were hidden. The orcs surrounded us instantly, laughing and threatening. They talked about skinning me, chopping me into pieces, and making soup. One joked they should throw away my brain because I was clearly an idiot for driving into a dead end. They were having a great time planning their meal. Ear was shaking. "Master, what do we do?" I smiled. "Relax. They're just offerings." The orcs went quiet, then furious. The leader ordered the attack. That's when the sound started, bones grinding against bones, coming from every direction. Armored skeletons stepped out from behind the rocks and ridges of the pass, weapons drawn, surrounding the orcs completely. Tens of thousands of them. The hunters had walked straight into the trap. The orcs panicked when skeletons poured out from every direction. 20-something warriors against tens of thousands of undead. It wasn't even a fight. 5 minutes, and it was over. We collected the spoils. 8 writhing spines, 22 orc weapons, 15 leather armors, and 43 war coins. Not a huge haul, but the spines and coins were always welcome. I ordered the bodies buried and the army to march home. Was sitting in the wagon with her eyes wide open, completely frozen. I could tell her brain was struggling to process what she'd just seen. Her new master, who she'd assumed was just some regular human trader, had just commanded a skeleton army the size of a small nation. Then a notification popped up. Her loyalty dropped 5 points to 70. That confused me. She'd been fine when we were surrounded by orcs threatening to eat us, but now that we were safe, she was more scared. I offered her some dried meat and tried to make casual conversation. She ate in tiny bites, stealing glances at me. Then she asked the question that was clearly eating her alive. "Master, will you turn me into a skeleton too?" I almost choked. "You want to be a skeleton?" She dropped to her knees instantly, begging. "No. Doesn't want to be a skeleton. Will be good and obedient. Please don't turn into a skeleton." Her clothes shifted as she bowed, and I had to look away. I told her to get up. I had no plans to turn her into anything. She could relax, live normally, and do things she enjoyed. Nobody in the territory would bother her. Relief washed over her face, and she finally smiled for the first time. Her loyalty jumped 10 points to 80. I lay back in the wagon and opened the chat channel to kill time. Someone was freaking out about a massive skeleton army marching past their territory. The responses were hilarious. One guy claimed he'd knelt down and watched them pass. Another offered to sell unicorn blood for 500 wood. Someone else claimed to be a fortune teller. I looked around and spotted a small territory with a protection shield off to our side. Figures were clustered together, staring at my army. I ignored them. We reached the territory at dusk. Eater's jaw dropped again when she saw the inside. Skeletons everywhere, patrolling, farming, hauling resources. This wasn't a human settlement. It was an undead city with one living person in it. Well, 2 now. I had the war coins carried carefully into my cabin and the rest of the loot sent to storage. Then I told to prepare dinner for 2 from the meat in the warehouse. She lit the fire and got to work immediately. Having someone who could actually cook, and who had a chef skill that boosted morale, was going to change my daily meals dramatically. While she cooked, I started building. First up was the arrow tower blueprint I'd traded for at the market, a defensive structure that could spot enemies early and fire at them automatically. I placed 4 arrow towers on the corners of my city walls. Each one stood about 5 meters tall with a stone base and wooden platform on top. I upgraded all 4 to level 3, which pushed them to 7 meters, tall enough to spot enemies early and provide ranged fire support. Each tower could hold 4 archers, but I didn't have a proper archer unit yet, so I assigned 16 skeleton soldiers with crossbows to man them per tower. I crafted iron arrows using the blueprint I'd traded for at the market. One craft of 10 became 1,010 after amplification. The crossbow skeletons grabbed bundles of arrows and climbed into position. Then I checked the fertility goddess statue blueprint I'd gotten at the market. When I read the stats, I nearly shouted. It was a blue-tier special building that boosted all planting and gathering across the entire territory by 10%. That was an enormous bonus. The materials were expensive, over 1,000 stone, 5 natural gems, 2 magic essences, and several types of rare traces. But I had everything after today's trading at Manom. I built it in the center of my territory. The construction took 5 full minutes, longer than anything I'd built before. When the blue light faded, a beautiful 3-meter stone goddess stood there, arms outstretched as if blessing the land. A soft glow spread across the entire territory as the effect activated. My defenses were finally shaping up. Walls, arrow towers, tens of thousands of soldiers. Even without the newbie shield, I could handle most threats. And the beauty of being undead faction was that every battle made me stronger. Enemy kills meant writhing spines, which meant more troops through amplification. Like a snowball rolling downhill. The only way to stop me was to kill me outright in a single fight. Master, dinner is ready. Eeyore had cooked a proper meal, vegetable soup and meat steaks. The smell alone was incredible. I took a bite and almost melted. Perfectly cooked, actually seasoned. Leagues better than my sad roasted meat chunks. Her chef skill was the real deal. She stood to the side watching me eat, swallowing hard but not sitting down. Old slave habits. She'd been trained never to eat with her master. I told her to sit and eat. She hesitated, stepped forward, then stepped back. I had to tell her twice more before she finally perched on the edge of the bench like a nervous child and took a small sip of soup, peeking at me between bites. While we ate, I opened the chat channel. People were panicking again because I hadn't posted food all day, no lunch, no dinner. Some worried I was dead. Others defended me. Then the conversation turned ugly. Someone called me a show-off idiot who deserved to die and bragged they'd finish me off if they ever found me. While eating dinner, I noticed the chat channel had turned into a war zone, but not the useful kind. A group of people were openly insulting me, calling me names, wishing me dead. Others jumped to my defense, which only made the argument louder. Dong Jayue messaged me privately to check if I was okay and warned me not to take it personally. When I asked what triggered it, she explained, some people resented me for selling goods at low prices. My cheap iron axes meant they couldn't mark up their own products and profit. She suspected Yao Liang, the guy I'd publicly humiliated weeks ago over the iron axe scam, was organizing the attacks behind the scenes. He wasn't posting himself, but the pattern felt coordinated. I wasn't too bothered. I posted a brief public statement. I was fine, thanked those who cared, and announced I'd blacklisted the troublemakers from all future trades. Then I listed 1,000 units of meat. The channel erupted again, supporters cheering, haters mocking. By now, most lords could hunt enough to feed themselves, so food wasn't life or death anymore. That's why these people felt bold enough to antagonize me. Then everything changed. The system announcement hit everyone at once. Newbie protection had 10 hours left. When it expired, every territory would face a beast blood frenzy. All nearby monsters would go berserk with a 30% stat boost and attack every territory for 24 hours. Before I could process that, a second notification appeared, just for me. My newbie mission had been forcibly changed. Because I'd killed the Fireblade chieftain's son, the tribe was sending 30,000 orc warriors to attack my territory. My task wasn't to survive random beasts like everyone else. I had to defend against an organized army. I'd expected retaliation ever since killing Kidwa, but I hadn't expected the system to formally tie it into a quest. Still, I wasn't panicking. I had over 1,300 writhing spines in reserve, 150,000 existing troops, city walls, arrow towers, and the ability to mass-produce more soldiers and equipment in minutes. Even if they were all first-tier, 150,000 skeletons could grind down 30,000 orcs through pure attrition. Back in the channel, everyone was losing their minds. People scrambled to buy walls, fences, weapons, anything defensive. Some were still using bone spears. Someone remembered I'd traded iron spears a few days ago, and suddenly everyone realized I had iron weapons and hardwood shields. The panic buying was about to begin. The forced mission announcement hit everyone like a punch to the gut. People who'd been comfortable behind their shields suddenly realized they had 10 hours before monsters came charging in with a 30% stat boost. The arguments about me stopped instantly. Every single person in the channel started begging me to sell weapons. I'd been sitting on a mountain of outdated equipment in my warehouse. Old wooden shields that had been replaced by hardwood ones, rusty swords, and broken spears from the castle and orc battles, leftover orc weapons. None of it was top quality, but all of it could save lives tomorrow. I listed everything. Over 1,100 mixed weapons and 4,200 wooden shields, priced at 300 wood, 150 stone, 5 iron, or 2 units of any special resource per piece. The channel did a complete 180. The same people who'd been cursing my name minutes ago were now calling me Big Brother and Dear Father, begging me to remove them from the trade blacklist. One guy claimed he'd slap himself if I'd just sell him some weapons. Another swore he'd been just joking when he called me names. I didn't unblock a single one of them. In fact, their desperation was useful. It was flushing out exactly who was in that little anti-me alliance. Better to know my enemies now than be surprised later. Private messages poured in with trade offers. People brought whatever they had, blueprints for wooden cups, leather pants, grid windows, and a green tier alarm bell. Most blueprints were low value since people usually absorbed them into their lord's book immediately. The ones available for trade were either duplicates or things people had deliberately saved to sell. I accepted almost everything, even a wooden cup blueprint that was basically worthless, just to keep goodwill flowing. Everything sold out fast. I collected huge amounts of basic resources plus special materials I'd never seen before. Copper ore, saltpeter, alongside the usual natural gems and earth traces. After dinner, Ear was clearing the table when I crafted wooden cups. One craft became 101, appearing out of thin air on the table and scaring her half to death. She scrambled to catch the ones rolling off the edge. Some things about my abilities. Don't tell anyone, I said. Yes, master. I'll never tell a soul. She nodded so hard her rabbit ears flopped. I kept a few cups for us and sent the rest to storage. Then I got back to preparations. I crafted green tier alarm bells for the arrow towers. They could warn of approaching enemies. Tomorrow was going to be the biggest fight since I'd arrived in this world. Not random beasts, but 30,000 organized orc warriors coming specifically to kill me. I needed every advantage I could get. I crafted 101 alarm bells and installed 4 on the arrow towers. When I tested one with a light tap, the sound was deafening. Birds scattered from the forest and my ears rang. At least I knew they worked. I decided against building more farms or lumber yards outside the walls. With orcs coming tomorrow, anything outside was a target. Those could wait until after the battle. At the skeleton conversion field, I'd unlocked 2 unit types, the 3rd-tier giant bats and 1st-tier skeleton pigmen. The pigmen were identical to regular skeleton soldiers in stats, so no point recruiting those. I focused entirely on giant bats to fill my air power gap. I set recruitment to 300, and the amplification gave me 30,300 bat skeletons. They materialized everywhere, then flew out of the territory to wait in the open field on my command. That used 300 writhing spines, leaving 1,072. I spent the rest at the barracks. 500 spines became 50,500 skeleton soldiers. The remaining 572 became 57,772 skeleton spearmen. Over 100,000 new troops appeared at once, stacking on top of each other inside the territory, because there simply wasn't room. I immediately crafted full equipment sets for all of them: swords, spears, shields, leather armor, helmets, and boots using the new leather boot blueprint from the market. That completed the full armor set for the first time. Every skeleton got fully geared and marched outside to form up. I called for Ear and found her hiding inside the cabin, peeking out with half her face, terrified by the army I'd just summoned. She crept out when I called her name. I gave her a pair of leather boots. Her old shoes were falling apart, clean but full of holes. She slipped them on and tapped her feet on the ground with a little smile. First new shoes she'd had in who knows how long. Then I showed her to her own room in the cabin. It was one of the furnished rooms with a fur rug, silk curtains, carved wardrobe, and desk, all looted from the castle. She stared in disbelief. As a slave, she'd been kept in cages. Having her own room with actual furniture was beyond anything she'd imagined. I crafted a single bed and grid wooden windows, had 2 skeletons carry them in, and set everything up. When I walked in, she was standing barefoot on the carpet, wiggling her toes on the soft fur. She straightened up nervously when she saw me. I told her to rest, reminded her nobody here would hurt her, and that she could order the skeletons around for heavy lifting. She thanked me quietly, and I headed upstairs. Her loyalty rose to 90. Everything was ready. I lay in bed that night running through every detail of my plan. This wasn't a game. If I died tomorrow, it was over for real. I'd spent every last writhing spine recruiting troops specifically to guarantee overwhelming numbers. I couldn't afford to stumble now, not after building so far ahead of everyone else. The chat channel was quiet for once. No jokes, no arguments. Everyone was preparing for the forced mission. The pressure was real. Before sleeping, I possessed a giant bat and did one final aerial patrol around the territory. Nothing suspicious. I released the skill and drifted off. Morning came with ear gently shaking me awake. I jumped up, washed my face, and climbed the wall to scan the eastern horizon, the direction the Fireblade tribe would come from. Nothing visible yet. Trees and hills blocked the view. I sat on top of an arrow tower and possessed a giant bat, flying east to scout. Sure enough, a massive orc army was marching toward me, about an hour away. What I learned later filled in the rest. Last night, the Fireblade scouts had reported back to Chief Kent that my territory had only about 5,000 or 6,000 low-tier skeletons patrolling outside. Kent had been so furious at the kobold chieftain for exaggerating the threat that he'd had him executed. This morning, Kent mobilized his entire tribe, 20,000 infantry, 7,000 javelin throwers, and 3,000 wolf riders. He was planning to crush my territory before nightfall, loot everything, and personally torture me to death before feeding my remains to his wolves. When the orc army came within sight of my walls, they saw my skeleton forces lined up outside, roughly 100,000 strong. Kent just laughed. Low-tier skeletons, no matter how many, didn't scare him. He gave the order to attack. On the wall, I watched the countdown hit 0. The system announced that newbie protection was officially over. My shield shattered like glass and dissolved into nothing. The orc war horns blew. Their entire army surged forward in a frenzy. No tactics, just a mass charge. The wolf riders pulled ahead with their superior speed, aiming to hit first. Crossbows, fire, I ordered. 1,000 bolts rained down from the walls, catching the riders off guard. Their formation scattered, but they kept coming. I called Ear over. She was wearing leather armor, face white with fear. I told her to watch over my body, then sat down on the wall and activated divine possession. I entered a skeleton spearman on the ground. Compatibility, 75%. Spearman, 2 steps forward. Brace for charge, I commanded. Thousands of spears tilted forward in unison, a forest of iron points aimed directly at the wave of wolves and riders racing toward us. The wolf riders saw my wall of spears and yanked their reins hard. Charging into that would be suicide. But the moment they stopped, another volley of crossbow bolts rained down, dropping riders and wolves alike. The orc infantry didn't slow down. 20,000 of them came screaming forward. Their javelin throwers stopped at about 400 meters and started launching short spears into my skeleton formations. I switched between divine possession targets rapidly, possessing a spearman on the ground to issue orders, then jumping back to my body on the wall to check the overall situation, then possessing a giant bat to command the air force. It felt like playing a real-time strategy game, except instead of clicking a mouse, I had to keep passing out and waking up in Ear's arms. I unleashed my hidden card. 30,000 skeleton giant bats burst from the forest canopy like a black cloud, blotting out the sky. They dove straight into the javelin throwers, tearing through them before the nearby infantry could respond. One attack run, then they shot back into the air before the orcs could retaliate. Kent noticed and ordered his troops to push harder. When the orc main force was 300 meters from my walls, I sprung the trap. The rest of my skeleton army emerged from behind and on both sides of the orc formation, spearmen and swordsmen in organized ranks, closing in like a net. The bats kept diving from above, snatching orcs into the sky and ripping them apart. The orcs' morale collapsed as they realized they were completely surrounded by an endless sea of undead that felt no pain and no fear. Kent fought like a demon. He was a 3-tier blue hero, far beyond any regular soldier. His blade left trails of crimson energy that carved through dozens of skeletons with every swing. He charged his wolf chariot straight through my front lines, crushing everything in his path, and reached the city gate. One massive energy slash left a huge crack across the wooden doors. A few more hits, and he'd break through. I couldn't let that happen. While the battlefield consumed the orc army, I just needed to stall Kent until my numbers finished the job. I peeked through a gap in the wall, aimed my left hand, and launched a fireball from the flame ring. Kent sensed it coming. He spun his blade upward and deflected the fireball in a thunderous explosion. But that gave me the opening I needed. 2,000 crossbow skeletons on the wall focused all their fire on him alone. A black rain of arrows poured down. Kent's sword moved in a blur, knocking away arrows aimed at his body. But his two wolves weren't so lucky. Both collapsed, bristling with bolts like porcupines. Without his chariot, Kent lost his mobility. I kept up the ranged harassment, crossbow volleys, occasional fireballs when the cooldown ended, buying time while the battlefield behind him turned into a slaughter. My skeleton horde ground through every last orc soldier, using pure numbers to overcome the tier difference. It cost me dearly. I'd started with nearly 200,000 troops and was down to about 50,000. But every orc was dead. Only Kent remained, surrounded by an ocean of bones. Even alone, he was terrifying. Each swing killed dozens. But there was no escape and no reinforcements coming. My skeletons piled on from every direction for 30 minutes straight. Finally, with one last defiant roar, Kent disappeared under the tide. The battle was over. The undead had won. The battlefield was a nightmare. Bodies, bones, and severed limbs covered every inch of ground. Blood soaked into the earth, turning it black-red. Eeyore and I stood on the wall in silence, taking it all in. I opened the shattered gates and ordered the cleanup. Skeletons stripped every orc body of equipment and hauled the corpses to the conversion field. I gave Kent's body special treatment, had my skeletons strip him completely naked, and even pry his mouth open checking for gold teeth. The haul was staggering. Over 35,000 orc weapons, 27,000 leather armor sets, 8,300 iron armor sets. But what mattered most were the 18,867 writhing spines. With my amplification, that was enough to rebuild an army many times over. Ken also dropped 2 special items. A blue-tier war horn that boosted movement speed by 10% and attack by 2% when blown. That explained why the orcs had charged so fast. And a purple-tier weapon called the Bloodthirst Blade for level damage, part of the same Bloodthirst set I'd gotten the armor from when I killed his son Kidwa. Now I had the complete set. Still couldn't wear it. The armor was built for massive orcs, but someday. After cleanup, I gathered my remaining troops. The Fireblade tribe had sent every fighter they had. Their base would be nearly empty. If I didn't move fast, some other lord might stumble across it first and take what was mine by right of conquest. I told Eeyore to stay behind, guard the territory, and keep the gates shut for anyone but me. She looked terrified at being left alone with a bunch of skeletons, but she nodded and agreed. I took 30,000 soldiers and marched east, following the obvious trail the orc army had left in the dirt. I couldn't use divine possession. My mental energy was completely drained from switching bodies so many times during the battle. I wrote on a card instead, opening the chat channel to pass the time. The channel was grim. People were fighting for their lives against the beast frenzy. Some were trapped inside their cabins. Others were begging neighbors for help. Then it turned into a mass confession. People started declaring love to partners back on Earth, naming names, saying goodbye, one after another. It was like watching a group farewell letter scroll past. It stung more than the battle had. Everyone had someone. I just had skeletons and a rabbit girl I'd bought yesterday. Hours later, I reached the Fireblade base. It wasn't a village. It was practically a small city with tall stone walls. Only about a dozen guards had been left behind. I blew the war horn. The sound rang out, and my skeletons surged forward with boosted speed, scaling the walls before the defenders could even close the gates. The city fell in minutes. The gates swung open to welcome me in. I walked through and gave the order. Take everything that isn't nailed down. My skeletons scattered through the orc city like ants, grabbing everything that wasn't bolted down. I headed straight for the chieftain's hall, the richest building in any tribe. Inside was spacious and bright. I pointed at wall hangings, deer antler chandeliers, and furniture, ordering my skeletons to take it all. The place wasn't as fancy as the vampire castle, candles instead of glowing stones, but I wasn't picky. I sat in Kent's massive throne chair just to try it. Way too big for me. Had it carried out anyway. In the master bedroom, I found my second golden treasure chest. I mumbled every lucky prayer I could think of, then opened it. Out came a cavalry training camp blueprint, a green tier single-edge sword blueprint, a quarry blueprint, a leather saddle blueprint, 320 war coins, and 35 beast tooth stones. The orc faction's rare building material, like shadow stones for undead or bloodstones for vampires. My collection of faction-specific minerals was growing nicely. Then I spotted the livestock pen. Over 300 tamed one-horned goats, males and females, peacefully grazing without a care in the world. I remembered chasing a single wild one for an hour and failing. Now I had hundreds already domesticated. I ordered them all tied up and taken alive. The final inventory was enormous. Over 51,000 wood, 28,000 stone, 842 iron, 520 copper, 95,000 units of meat, 1,120 salt, 442 crates of fruit, 324 goats, 20,000 simple beds, 8,000 cabinets, 4,000 table and chair sets, plus pots, pans, curtains, and fabric. I crafted 30,000 carts using my amplification just to haul everything, and it still wasn't enough for one trip. I loaded the most important stuff first and headed home. Eir opened the gates looking relieved to see me. I told her to pick out better furniture for her room and had the goats driven into the ranch, which I immediately upgraded to level 3 to fit them all. Then I turned around and went back for the second load. By dusk, the last carts were rolling home. I lay on a cart scrolling through the chat channel. People were discussing their battle results. Most had survived the beast frenzy and were sitting on piles of monster meat. At least it was over for them. Then one message caught my eye. Zhang Bin, the fishing net skeleton guy whose territory sat downstream from the old kobold camp, not far from mine, was begging for help. He couldn't hold out any longer and was offering all his resources to anyone who could save him. On the way back with my second load of loot, I noticed Zhang Bin's desperate messages in the chat. He was the fishing net guy whose territory was somewhere downstream from the old kobold camp, not far from me. His defenses had collapsed, and he was making a last stand inside his lord's cabin with his remaining soldiers. He'd promised everything he owned to anyone who'd save him. Nobody responded. Everyone was dealing with their own beast frenzy problems. My convoy happened to pass right near his territory. I had tens of thousands of skeletons with me, and the beasts attacking him were just a few hundred. This would take minutes. My army swept in and crushed the frenzied beasts without breaking stride. Zhang Bin's people watched from inside their boarded-up cabin as a white ocean of armored skeletons destroyed every beast in sight. After the cleanup, I possessed a skeleton and walked over to check if Zhang Bin had anything interesting. I found some rare gems in his warehouse and took those. Then I knocked on his cabin door. Dead silence inside, except for one muffled, "Holy crap." Nobody opened up, so I kicked the door in. Every person inside was staring at me in absolute terror. Zhang Bin dropped to his knees and started begging the undead lord not to harm them, babbling about never disturbing anyone's eternal rest. I pushed him aside and started looking around. His cabin was level 3, decent enough, but the furniture was basic homemade stuff. Nothing impressive. I went upstairs and searched every room until something caught my eye. A green tier weapon rack that could slowly repair damaged weapons placed on it. A genuinely useful item. I had no idea where he'd found it. I picked it up, walked back downstairs, patted Zhang Bin on the shoulder, and left with my army. We took about 100 beast carcasses and my new treasure, leaving the rest of the dead animals for Zhang Bin's people to eat. I could only imagine their confusion as they watched thousands of skeletons march away with a weapon rack and some rocks, having just saved their lives without explanation. Back at my territory, Eir had dinner waiting. Just as I finished directing the skeletons to unload the last shipment, the system announcement rang out. The Beast Blood Frenzy Challenge was officially over. All beasts still in berserk mode lost their buffs and retreated into the forests. We'd survived. The first real day without protection was behind us. Before anyone could catch their breath, the system announced the world rankings. My name echoed 3 times across every lord's ears. Feng Hao, first place worldwide in the Beast Blood Frenzy Challenge. The rewards were massive. Influence points for all factions, an extra 300 for my undead faction, a hero recruitment scroll, a special building blueprint, an equipment blueprint, and 300 war coins. Private messages flooded in. Dong Jiayue, traders I'd dealt with, random people, all congratulating me. The public channel went wild. People who'd survived thanks to weapons they'd bought from me were swearing loyalty. The mood had completely flipped from the insults I'd gotten just hours ago. After dinner, I went through my rewards carefully. The hero recruitment scroll was what excited me most. I'd seen what heroes could do. Tyrock, the bronze bull, commanded an entire market city through sheer presence. Ken had carved through my army like a one-man war machine and nearly broke my gates down alone. Heroes were on a completely different level from regular troops. And now I could summon one of my own. I forced myself to check the other rewards first. The orange tier Wishing Well blueprint was incredible. It let you spend basic resources once a week for a chance to receive whatever you wished for. But it needed 4 god statues as prerequisites, and I only had the fertility goddess so far. The material list was insane. Thousands of stone bricks, rare corals, magical essences, and something called Tears of Asha, a long-term project. The blue-tier dwarf musket blueprint was perfect for my skeletons. Simple trigger mechanism, effective attack power. I remembered trying to have my skeletons use slings once. Stones flew everywhere, hitting their own allies, nearly cracking my skull. Those slings got dismantled on the spot. A point-and-shoot musket was exactly the kind of weapon my dumb skeletons needed. Eeyore brought me washed fruit and knelt beside me to offer it. I told her to stop kneeling. Her knees were already red. She stood up nervously. The fruit tasted like a watery pear, nothing special, but we had hundreds of crates from the orc territory. Just the 2 of us couldn't possibly eat them all before they rotted. Then, scroll in hand, I walked outside into the moonlit night. I briefly imagined famous generals from Chinese history before remembering this was a different world entirely. I just prayed for someone powerful, high tier, fearless, strong enough to let me relax a little. Use. The scroll dissolved into light. A glowing magic circle appeared on the ground, and from its center, a tall, gaunt figure slowly rose, bathed in golden-orange light. Holy, legendary gold. The light faded. Standing before me was a towering skeletal figure wrapped in dark robes. Corpse Warlock Nielsen. Orange tier. 7th tier hero. The light faded and there stood Nielsen, over 1.8 meters tall, slightly hunched like an old man, wearing a fine robe and leaning on a staff. A skeleton, but one with presence and dignity. He studied me just as carefully as I studied him. His first reaction wasn't great. A system notification told me his loyalty had dropped 10 points to 60, just from seeing that his new master was human. He hadn't expected that, and clearly didn't think his abilities suited serving a living person. I cleared my throat and welcomed him formally. He bowed back, polite but cautious. Then he asked if I wasn't frightened by his appearance. Most living creatures wanted nothing to do with the undead. I smiled and repeated the phrase I'd memorized from the skeleton merchant rule. The undead god accepts all believers' faith. That changed everything. Nielsen straightened up and bowed properly. May you be strong and immortal, he said. His loyalty jumped 20 points to 80. I made a mental note to use that line on every undead recruit from now on. I checked his full stats. He wasn't the powerful warrior I'd hoped for. He was a corpse warlock, essentially a funeral scholar. His background was in royal burial rites, cleaning organs, preserving bodies, performing funeral magic. But his abilities were extraordinary in their own way. He had talents that boosted magic power, ranged unit attack strength, and mage unit damage. His skills included an earth spell called Burial that could encase enemies in crushing soil, unlimited organ jar storage, and a self-contained building blueprint for an organ museum. Most importantly, his skill Deceive Death could turn any dead creature into an undead being, if he chose to. He was a 7th-tier orange hero, not a frontline fighter, but a strategic powerhouse focused on development and army enhancement. My path kept drifting further from the living world and deeper into undead territory. I asked about the organ museum. He explained it was a critical building for the royal funeral tradition. By storing organ jars filled with different energies, It could grant powerful abilities to troops and allow crafting of unique items. I built it immediately. The materials were steep, 12,000 wood, 10,000 stone, 4,200 rope, and precious shadow stones and death traces that I'd been saving. Construction took 30 minutes, the longest I'd ever waited for a building. While we chatted and waited, Eeyore came around the corner carrying a bucket. She froze when she saw Nielsen. A talking, robed skeleton with ghostly blue eyes was a lot to process. I introduced them. Nielsen bowed gracefully and called her Miss Eeyore. She mumbled a greeting without looking at his face. So that was my entire territory population. Me, a rabbit girl, and a skeleton scholar, surrounded by hundreds of thousands of silent bone soldiers. I really needed more living people. The museum finished building. It could hold up to 20 organ jars, and once filled, would grant army-wide buffs and unlock special weapon crafting. Upgrading it required enormous resources including stone bricks, and a Lord's Hall upgraded to a stone fortress, goals still far ahead. But the foundation was laid. With Nielsen's expertise and my amplification, the undead faction was about to enter a new phase entirely. The Organ Museum was the biggest building in my territory, one floor but sprawling, with painted murals of ritual scenes covering every wall. Nielsen invited me inside for a tour. The main hall was divided into labeled zones matching my undead buildings: underground graveyard, bone burial ground. Nielsen explained that once I obtained organ jars filled with special energies, I could place them in the corresponding zones to grant permanent abilities to those unit types. It was basically a buff system for my entire army. That's when I realized I'd gotten something even better than a warrior hero. With my amplification producing massive armies, boosting every soldier's power was far more valuable than one strong fighter. I asked how to get organ jars. He said I need a pottery workshop to make empty ones, or buy them from merchants. Another building blueprint to hunt for. The second chamber had a long polished stone table in the center. Nielsen casually mentioned that whenever I wanted to shed my mortal body, the ceremony could be performed right there. I almost stepped back before catching myself. That table was for making mummies. I told him I wasn't in a rush. His living quarters were inside the museum itself, which saved me from figuring out where to house a skeleton scholar. The next morning I slept in. Yesterday had been exhausting. Eeyore let me wake naturally. When I came downstairs, she was humming a song in her room. I nearly bumped into her when she opened her door. She'd just bathed, hair dripping wet, wrapped in nothing but a small fur blanket that barely covered anything. Her skin was flushed pink from the steam. I quickly looked away and told her not to catch a cold. She'd apparently saved all the nice curtain fabric from the castle and orc loot, refusing to use them as towels because they might be needed later. Practical girl. After my morning exercise routine, I built the cavalry training ground. For my undead faction, it transformed into something called the Hall of the Dead, a long corridor structure. Level 1 unlocked skeleton scouts, a mounted unit. I recruited one. The amplification gave me 101. A skeleton soldier riding a skeleton horse walked out of the corridor, followed by 100 more materializing in flashes of light. Each recruit came with its own mount. Much better value than regular infantry, where one spine got you one soldier. Here, one spine got you a rider and a horse. The skeleton scouts were second tier, equipped with riding and sword skills, plus a charge ability that could scatter enemy formations and deal heavy damage. Finally, I had mobile units. No more relying entirely on slow-marching foot soldiers. I nodded with satisfaction as the bone horses stamped and clattered across the ground. I equipped my new cavalry with green-tier single-edged swords, 1,010 of them after amplification, and leather saddles that boosted stability and horse speed. The conversion field was also still processing the dead wolf riders from yesterday's battle, turning them into skeleton cavalry under my command. Between recruited scouts and converted riders, my mounted forces were growing fast. While gearing up the cavalry, I suddenly remembered the order for Tyrock the Bronze Bull. 3,000 battle axes, delivery in 3 days. Today was day 2. I needed to start preparing those tomorrow at the latest. Over breakfast with Eeyore, I passed Nielsen outside his museum and invited him to eat. He politely declined. Being undead, he didn't need food. Eeyore was more relaxed now, sitting down to eat without being asked twice. 2 days of decent treatment had started chipping away at her slave conditioning. The chat channel was full of panic. Without the protection shield, wild animals had raided several territories overnight, stealing food from warehouses, lurking near sleeping areas. Most lords still didn't have walls. Someone suggested using raw logs to build makeshift fences around key buildings, which triggered a rush to buy iron axes from me. I understood the bigger picture. These lords needed to get stronger so they could eventually trade me better things. Right now, most of them were too poor to offer anything I wanted. By selling cheap tools, I was investing in the whole region's development. Richer neighbors meant better trade goods flowing my way eventually. I crafted 1,010 iron axes and listed them. The channel exploded. Someone pointed out that I always sold in quantities of 101 or 1,010 and asked if it had some special meaning. Everything sold out in minutes. I collected iron and some rare materials, but no blueprints this time. People hadn't gone exploring yet after yesterday's beast attack. After breakfast, I lay on my bed and activated Divine Possession, entering a skeleton scout. The compatibility was 50%, not great, but I wouldn't need to stay long. I grabbed the reins, kicked the bone horse into a gallop, and led all 101 scouts south to begin mapping new territory. The speed difference was incredible compared to walking everywhere with infantry. Cavalry changed everything. The cavalry made an incredible difference. What used to take hours on foot was cut in half on horseback. I rode to Gloomwind Castle first to check on the demolition work. My skeletons had been chipping away at the stone walls for 2 days, but progress was slow. Only 167 usable stone bricks so far. Most broke apart into regular stone during removal. The workers' stone pickaxes were primitive and wore out fast. I inspected the supply of replacement tools and cart availability, made sure nothing would slow them down, and rode on. Instead of heading back, I pushed southwest to expand my map coverage. Cavalry could cover ground quickly, crashing through all but the thickest forest. We ran into another group of lost wood elemental spirits, 15 or 16 of them this time. I grumbled about whoever had summoned and abandoned these things without any sense of responsibility. According to their description, they'd been created by a summoner who discarded them, leaving them to wander mindlessly and attack anything that moved. I ordered the charge. 100 skeleton riders burst from the trees, swords drawn, and sliced through the spirit's formation like a knife through paper. Half died before they could even react. We wheeled around and charged again. 2 passes, and they were all dead. Cavalry charges against scattered enemies were devastatingly efficient. We collected the loot, 2 natural essences, and searched the area. Instead of a treasure chest, I found something else. A corpse sitting against a tree trunk, half decomposed, wrapped in rotting robes and overgrown with vines. A dead mage, killed by magical backlash according to the system description. His backpack was falling apart. Inside I found 3 things. First, a magic awakening potion. Drinking it would permanently transform my body into a mage's constitution, letting me sense and use magic. A career-defining item. But the mage had been dead for who knows how many years. Was this potion expired? I really wanted to become a mage, but I wasn't about to drink mystery liquid from a rotten corpse's bag and risk a stomach perforation. Second was a skill scroll, Wood Elemental Guardian. It could summon 2 wood spirits to fight alongside me for 30 minutes. My third skill after Bone Command and Divine Possession, and my first non-faction one. It might open up a real combat class for me eventually. Third, 120 war coins tucked in the bag. I told my skeletons to bury the mage properly. As they lifted the body, something fell from his hand, an item he'd been clutching even in death. "Bring that to me," I said. The item that fell from the dead mage's hand was a small metal locket, coin-sized, caked in dirt. I pressed a tiny bump on the side and it clicked open, revealing the name, Gregoria, engraved inside. The system described it as a nearly worthless silver pendant carrying a father's memories, with a hint that returning it to Gregoria might trigger something. Sounded like a quest. I pocketed it. If I ever ran into this Gregoria person, I'd hand it over and see what happened. After burying the mage, I lost interest in further patrolling. The magic awakening potion was burning a hole in my thoughts. I circled back to the territory with my cavalry, assigned them patrol routes, and released Divine Possession. I called Nielsen over. Eir fetched him reluctantly. She was still scared of the skeletal scholar, tiptoeing to the museum entrance and calling out in a tiny voice. He emerged leaning on his staff, ghostlight flickering in his eye sockets. I handed him the potion and asked the one question on my mind. Was this thing still safe to drink? He recognized it immediately as an alchemist's brew and assured me it was perfectly fine. When I asked about expiration, he didn't even understand the concept. Apparently potions in this world didn't go bad. Good enough for me. I uncapped the bottle and drank it all. It tasted like foot-soaked water. Awful, but then warmth spread from my stomach through my entire body. Something changed inside me, though I couldn't pinpoint exactly what. The system confirmed it. My magic power and spiritual energy had increased, and I'd gained deeper understanding of elemental forces. I was officially a mage now. I immediately pulled out the wood elemental guardian skill scroll. This time it let me learn it directly. The scroll dissolved into light and entered my body. I activated the skill right away. 2 humanoid figures materialized in front of me. Wood elemental spirits, 3rd tier, made of twisted branches and vines with green shoots sprouting from their bodies. They had binding abilities, a self-healing skill, and were immune to wood magic and mental effects. Most impressively, when I pointed at a heavy wooden bench that normally took 4 skeletons to lift, one spirit extended vine tentacles from its arm, wrapped the bench, and hoisted it effortlessly. Eeyore squealed with excitement. Oddly, she wasn't afraid of the wood spirits at all, unlike everything else undead. I told her to keep it down. I pointed at something even heavier. Try lifting that one. I tested the wood spirit's strength and abilities for the full 30 minutes before they vanished. They were impressive, powerful, and versatile, but only 2 at a time wasn't enough for real combat. They'd work best as personal bodyguards or support units. The skeleton army would remain my main fighting force. Over lunch, I browsed the chat channel. The conversations had shifted dramatically. People were discussing hunting tactics, trap-setting techniques, and weapon preferences instead of begging for food. One guy tried to sound tough talking about his old street-fighting days until his supplier threatened to cut him off. Someone else advertised beast traps disguised as helpful advice. The world was evolving. The weak had already been weeded out by the beast frenzy, and the survivors were getting bolder. After lunch, I spent the afternoon exploring on horseback, then returned at dusk. Before I could even dismount, Nielsen walked up to meet me. He'd noticed something important in the skeleton conversion field. The body of Kent, the orc hero chieftain, was queued up among the tens of thousands of orc corpses waiting to be processed. Nielsen thought converting a hero through the regular field was a waste.